Good evening. Tonight is Monday, September 21st, 2015. This is a special meeting of the Board of Education for District 64. Tonight we will have a short open meeting and proceed into a committee of the whole on finance. So why don't we start by opening our regular meeting. So Vicki, please take a roll call.
Mark Egeman.
Present.
Bob Johnson.
Here.
Vicki Lee is here. Tony Borelli.
Here.
Scott Zimmerman.
Here.
Dathan Paterno.
Here.
And Tom Sotos.
Tom, I don't see Tom.
I don't have a text from him.
Yeah, I don't have a text. He very well may be late. I'm just going to switch over to a different document on my computer for a second. And prior to going into our open meeting, I have a suggestion for the board, and that would be, if I can get my computer, here we go. And that would be to consider a topic from staffing to go into a closed session to discuss this issue according to 5 Illinois Compiled Statutes 122C1, which is the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, and performance or dismissal of a specific employee of the district. We've all had a little bit of information, but we need to discuss this more in depth tonight with potential action being taken, occurring later or carried over to our next meeting. So we'll need a roll call for this.
Just clarifying, we have to go into closed session for information regarding this?
Yes.
Okay, just want
Yes.
that to be clear.
Okay. So that being said, Dathan, why don't we start with you?
Aye.
Scott?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Aye. No.
Okay, why don't we go into closed? All right, we are resuming the special board meeting of Monday, September 21st, 2015, and we will go into a cow. The board has just spent the last half hour discussing some administrative issues in closed session. We are now reconvening in our open meeting, and we will slide into our committee of the whole on finance. Our next meeting is going to be a regular board meeting held on 9/28, 1 week from today. That will also be held at Jefferson. Items to include on that evening are a public hearing and adoption of the 2015-16 budget, review of residency verification, 6-day reports, and review of educational ends. I'd like to take a second to thank Dr. Heinz for her otherworldly efforts over the past 3 weeks as we enter this new school year. I've had the opportunity of emails and phone calls and such, and I've rarely seen anybody busier. From establishing inaugural yearly meetings, she has been meeting with board members, PTO, PTA, and ELF, all of the departments such as maintenance, custodians, finance, student services, student learning, PREA, leadership council, and district attorneys. It's also initiated Superintendent's Community Relations Council, which is part of the board-mandated comprehensive communication plan for the district going forward. I attended that. I suspect that we'll have an update on that at some point, a verbal update. You already had one in your superintendent memo from past Friday. So my many thanks and congratulations, Dr. Heinz, for her extra effort beyond our normal high energy during this time. Okay. And I'm just scrolling down here. I've got a bunch of stuff. So as we do in all of our, one final point. I emailed the board members over the weekend regarding these two things that come in the mail. The Illinois School Board Journal, the September-October 2015. There is an article in it. Usually I just skim through these things. But on page 21 of this particular item, I suggest reviewing this in preparation for our meeting with Terry Hodges next month, recommended collective bargaining strategies. And for tonight and for next week, what I found in the ASBJ Journal, which is from October 2015, volume 202, two articles actually, one on security checkpoints, which you will hear about tonight and again, and 3-4 pages later, there is pushing the limits. School boards have constraints and you can and must overcome them. Something that you will hear about once Barb Tony meets with us and we start talking about board functions and functionalities. So just at your leisure, when you're sitting on the veranda, you're looking at, the South 40, you might want to just peruse those.
Do you all have those publications? Because I can add them to the Friday memo if that would be easier, so they're electronically in the memo.
That'd be great.
Would you rather that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we always mandated to open our meetings with public comments. So if there are anybody in the audience who'd like to make a statement or a comment on something that's not on the agenda, please come forward. And not seeing anybody wanting to make those statements, we'll keep moving forward. The next item really is we will adjourn this open meeting to our Committee of the Whole on Finance. Is there any other questions or comments by the board before we do so? And not seeing any, we will reconvene in our Cow on Finance. Lori? Luann?
Thank you. The first thing I wanted to mention was Tony and I had a brief conversation before the meeting, and I think what he wants to get and what I want to get and Lori is an understanding of kind of documents that you guys, what your expectation is. You have a new business manager, so this is the time to kind of, if you have suggestions, let me know kind of what you're thinking, if things are working that I'm sending to you or not working. I am used to working with a finance committee, which is a much smaller group, and then the full board meeting, and they don't hear quite as much detail because they have the trust in their finance. So if I'm not telling you guys information that you need to know, or if you feel that we should be covering additional information, I'm always open to suggestions. Tony said that the PDF didn't come out that well on the budget, so I'm really sorry about that. Hopefully we can walk through it tonight, and if you guys have additional questions, I can either get it back to you in Lori's Friday memo, or Monday before you adopt the budget, we can address your additional concerns and questions. This is a learning experience for me. Every board is different, so I really do want to hear your concerns, whether you go through Tony or Lori, or both of us, and to me also, so that I'm delivering the documents that you guys want to see. The one thing I don't want to do is give you so much spreadsheets and documents that I'm drowning you. And typically what happens in that case is you have no understanding of what we're doing at that point. I'm an individual that likes to keep things somewhat simple. I'd rather come and talk to the board than read a presentation to you. So if there's things that you think would work differently for you as a board, just please let me know.
So for example, last presentation when you did the first half of the accounts, Dathan, you had commented that you liked the one-pager, that it was very clear, it was easy to read, you knew what was in each account, what the total fund balance was. Is that the sentiment of the rest of the board, that something kind of clean to summarize it is something that we want to make sure we have available?
Yeah, I agree, and I think I guess my limited comment would be I appreciate that you're looking at things at a very granular level, and just the materials that we receive for this meeting. I think from my perspective, where there are within a category lines that are very similar, I know you have them segregated for a purpose, but if the first, whatever it is, 13 digits are the same for that thing, like certified staff salaries, well, if there's 12 of those lines on something, I know you want to know what those 12 are there for and why, but I think from my perspective, I just rather see just one certified staff salary line. And so if you're doing this in Excel, maybe you could, whether it's with a pivot table or a macro or something, maybe make those that have those, similar codes for most of the category, because that would shrink this report significantly, all the individual lines for, dental insurance and, just get those down to one line for each of those categories, shrink this, and people who might not want to pour through something as long might be more apt to look at something that was a little bit shorter.
Okay.
So I think, to paraphrase, just the crunching the numbers, basically summarize some of the numbers, more on the verbal explanation, less on the numbers, and if there ever gets to be a point, I don't think that this board has ever been adverse to asking questions. So we'll, if we want to have more enumeration on a specific area, obviously an email can be sent ahead of time. I was looking at this, it doesn't quite make sense. Can you give me more background on this? And I think you'd be able to provide that data at that point.
So Brian Imhoff and I have been, just kind of a precursor to our discussion, have been, as you stated, looking at this at a pretty granular level. We're actually not done yet. We're still working on things. And if you were able to read my document, you'll see I have questions. What is this? Different things that we're still looking into. And even once the budget's adopted, we'll still be continuing to look into things and ask a lot of questions, and so that we have a full understanding of the budget, because then you'll have a full understanding of the budget. We didn't change a tremendous amount of numbers in here, especially for purchase services and supplies in that. We were not involved in the budget process, or I was not in the spring, and so I was not comfortable with changing a lot of them. The salaries that you see in the budget are for actual butts in the chair. So this is real people in the district. We've, slightly rounded some of the numbers just to, have a little bit of cushion. The only position I believe that we're looking at still potentially hiring is a Title I remedial teacher, if we get that approval in the grant, and we have allocated that money in the budget for that position. Brian spent a great deal of time going through all of the benefits for the district and doing the allocations for those, for TRS, IMRF, Social Security, and all of that. So what we're trying to present to the board is a realistic budget of what your expenditures really look like. And as I indicated in my report, even if there's not a budget there, if that's where that should be charged, we're going to charge it there this year, because that helps us next year when we put our budget together. If we're charging everything to the correct accounts, if individuals are all being charged to the correct accounts.
And you've spent considerable time doing that, moving line
Correct.
items, putting them into different categories to have a really clear understanding of what it costs to operate our art budget, what it costs to staff the district. So I appreciate how painstakingly, carefully you've been going through the budget.
So on what would be page 2 of your report, we did much the same as we did with the other funds, which was to show you in the education, municipal retirement, debt services, and capital projects what your adopted budget was for 14-15, what your tentative budget is as of September 21st, the variance, and then I put to the right what you guys had in our adopted tentative budget. As you can see, not a lot of the numbers have changed tremendously, just probably mostly due to our looking more in detail at salaries and benefits, so the changes have not been tremendous in there.
Luann, how did the debt service number go down?
Well, we pulled off of Elizabeth's reports. Well, actually, it went up. So if you look, the tentative budget is $3,300,295.
Mm-hmm.
So we pulled off of Elizabeth Hennessy's reports what those debt service payments are. So we actually get, you'll see tonight, you'll have a lot of that information also. I actually can pull from her reports what's being sent to the county clerk for the payments that need to be made.
So I still don't understand.
Okay,
because
so
tentatively, we had a number, and that number is based on some concrete figures, right?
Well, my number is, which is the third column over, so as of September 21, 2015, our payments would total $3.3 million for this year. Correct.
And I remember Becky's old reports, and it was about 3.3 per year.
Right.
Yeah, I get it. But according to this, it's going to be 3.1.
No, the far right is what was in your tentative budget that you adopted.
Oh, okay, so the updated is...
Right,
now-
is the third. I just wanted to give you that kind of as the history, so you
okay.
can kind of track what we're doing with that.
And Luann, could you, in the future, I guess, next iteration, so I understand here you're comparing the draft budget versus the budget that we had last year. but can we compare that to actual? I mean, yeah, we had a budget last year, but I would be more interested in, well, what did we really do? And then how does our budget that we're contemplating at the moment compare to the prior year? Because last year's budget, that's gone. That's, we've actually experienced it, so why don't we use our actual experience?
Okay, all right, we can definitely do that.
And you did that in the details more.
Right.
You actually have
You just wanted that
the
in
prior
the chart.
fiscal year.
Okay, you
But
wanted
yeah,
it at the
if we're
higher
trying to do
level.
real high level here, why don't we show that, I don't mind if you want to leave this in, but if we could display how we actually
Okay.
did in the past fiscal year.
Okay, we
I'd
can,
like to keep the budgeted numbers from last year as well as the actuals.
Okay.
I'd like
I'm
to
fine
see what we
leaving it,
planned
yeah.
for last year, what we achieved, and what we plan for next year.
Well,
That's season
Sure.
3.
That sounds
and
fine.
going forward next year, that far right column is probably not necessarily going to be there because it'll then be my budget. So, then we can add our actuals in at the high level for you guys, which is something we definitely will do. I just wanted to, unless that would be too painful, kind of walk you guys through the different functions, see if you had any questions. Yes? Okay. So starting at the top, we have 1100, which is basically our regular K-12 programs. So this is for children not requiring any special assistance. It's your reading, writing, and arithmetic. This is kind of where those teachers are charged and what the associated supplies and services are charged. So it does not include art, PE, special education, gifted, or bilingual or bilingual or foreign language.
Can I ask, Lynn, when I looked in here, I understand exactly what you're saying, but the reference to PE, I didn't see a separate category for PE here.
That's probably, if you guys couldn't read it, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
So 1110 is your basic education.
Right.
Okay, and then we separate out 1110 for our elementary education, 1120 for our middle school. So if I just kind of walk through, you'll see PE. We then separate out our what we call RTI, or Reading and Math Recovery Programs. This one is kind of one I'm still working with Jane and Lori on. I'm kind of making sure that I've pulled it apart correctly in here. You guys need to understand, RTI is not special education. So this is like and Jane, correct me if I say something wrong, this is our Tier 1 and Tier 2 supports for our students.
Tier 2 and Tier 3. Tier 1 is like the core.
Okay, so
curriculum that everybody has access
Tier
to.
2, Tier 3 supports. It is not a special education. So this is if you have a child that simply has issues with reading, they would meet with like a reading recovery teacher and work on those issues.
And Lori, I
Okay?
have a question for you. 1111, do you want it to read reading and math recovery, or would you rather to say intervention?
I think intervention.
So
So when we finalize it, if you could just change recovery to intervention, and I
okay,
apologize.
intervention. That's okay.
I missed that when I approved it last week. Yeah, thank you.
So reading and math intervention. Okay. Okay. So one of the changes, and this is what I really like in being able to separate out our suite of accounts, is 1113 is the art program within the district. These used to be fairly difficult unless you worked with the numbers all the time to identify what we're spending on different programs. Districts use this for different reasons. I've had to use it in 2 districts where we needed to make budget cuts. So you start looking at programs and at what's your core education and what are other areas that potentially we could reduce our costs. Obviously, we're not looking at doing that right now, but I like laying out programs so people understand how much we're spending on different programs in the district.
This is all the education fund, and there's like 2.5 pages of specific subgroups in it. And based on what was just said before, at some point, will we have the subgroup, let's say 1114 band program, and a number next to it? That would be
We could certainly do that.
our expenditure, because then we could see the report, we could see the expenditure, and then what's budgeted, and then what the real expenditure would be at the end of the year. And then we could, because you're delving into each one of these almost on a line-by-line basis. And at some point, you're looking at it from a financial standpoint to look at it is this categorized properly, and is this allocated properly? About 2 years ago, perhaps 3, I raised with Becky Allard an issue about the funding for extracurricular activities. And we were going to do an evaluation of that, a study of that. The district is sponsoring these programs to the tune of 50 to 60%, and they are being self-funded to the tune of about 40%. Some of these instances, like individual music lessons, they are subsidized to an incredible degree. And I want the board to be aware of these subsidizations, and should the district be covering some of these extracurricular activities. Is there any plan on your part to delve into that area and bring it back to the board at some point?
Yes, so when we look at fees for the next year and the recommendation for the fees we're going to charge, the document I present to the board is one page, and it also includes, we have X number of students participating in the different programs. So we can estimate what the additional small fees are that we charge for band and that. And then I show you what the cost is to the district. So as you said, it is a huge difference.
Yeah.
So I think in looking this over, one has to also think about what do we mean by a free and equitable education. So I think that's kind of just food for thought as we think about that. But when I show you the fees, I do show you not for like art and PE separate, but you're talking about your interscholastics, your band, your chorus, your orchestra programs.
Right.
Things outside of the normal day-to-day
Exactly.
activities of the school district. Speaking of which, so one more question then. On your monthly financials right now, you get reports that have about this amount of detail. Would you rather see it summarized at a higher level?
I would-
Yes, I would. Anybody?
Now, remember, with that said, thinking that after we meet with Barb, Tony, in a few Saturdays to talk about committees, it is our strong desire to have a finance committee developed. So a couple members of the board would meet with Loanne, myself, and whomever else you would like to invite. We'll go more deeply into the reports the way you typically see them, sign off kind of that, and then it comes to the rest of the board in more of a summary form.
So the question is, do we need this on a monthly basis? Is it going to be available to us?
Yeah.
I mean, those are two different things. So I want all the information as granular as possible available to us for those of us who, whose Ambien isn't working, we need to stay up late. Or do we have to be aware of this and being able to have a discussion about it, we have to know all of this stuff. I don't think we need to know the dissertation amount every month, but having it available to us, I think, is critical.
Right. So there's different ways we can look at it in Skyward. One option, and I'm still learning Skyward, which is part of my struggle too, is to look at it at the function level and then at the high level of our objects. So high level of salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies, and that for each different function. So you would see art in like 6 lines. So much like you said, all the salaries would be totaled, all your benefits. So we could look at that if you wanted to see that on a month-to-month, and then maybe quarterly. We would give you the more detail, and that report is always available. So
I think the thing that is most important is the days on hand, the cash projections,
Mhm.
the fact that we know where we're headed on a macro level. When I go down to like page 25, for instance, and I see something like that doesn't help me
Right.
very much.
She's trying to streamline that.
And that's why I said, like Bob had asked, I think if we see these categories with budgeted amounts, where we're tracking, how we're staying on task with those budgets, I think those are the kind of things that
Okay.
I'd like to see.
now I
If
will.
it's- if I may.
Go ahead.
This budget, if you're going to create a more streamlined budget, you're going to do it off of this product anyway. This product has to be produced, and then you're just going to use buttons to make it smaller.
Right, so,
I would like to see the smaller, but I would still like to see this attached
So-
to it, so that if I do have a question, I can go back to it.
And then with what level of frequency is, that's kind of what Dathan was saying. Is it quarterly that you'll see the full thing, but you'll always have access monthly if you want it because it's available from Skyward? Because the other thing Luann's shifted from is she's not taking the information from Skyward and putting it into Excel. It's coming straight from
Right.
Skyward. Skyward's generating it. There's no middle step, middle ground, other way in which the numbers are being crunched. So it's always available.
I would advocate the detail being online for us, is that's where we're moving
Put it to the
anyways
board
with
wiki,
stuff. And so maybe
the
there's a
dashboard.
section on the board wiki where we know here's the current, and we could even look at past ones. Maybe you throw those in a different folder over time, but it's like, there's the current detail if you ever want it. But maybe at a monthly or semi-monthly, we get the summary just so we know where things are going on, if that's a short page or something like that. I like the idea of being able to go get the detail, but you don't need to make my board books thicker.
I mean, your board book's not gonna get thicker than that,
Mike and
unless you get a bigger case.
That's true.
so for the budget, though, this will be how you'll be seeing it, just because it's,
coming out of Skyward.
right, you guys, well, and you guys really need to understand all the different parts of the budget. And like you said, you would have it on hand. If you have questions, you can go back and refer to it. Okay. So we have our art followed by our band program. So this is our instrumental band program here in the district. So you can see approximately what that's costing the district. You will notice that the adopted budget and the fiscal year activity for a lot of these, like band, last year we only had $37,500 for the band program, when in reality it's about a $600,000 program. So now it's all allocated correctly. So you guys can look at that. General music programs are the music that's offered to all children, beginning, I believe, at the kindergarten level in this school district. So that's your regular music program. PE programs. So PE is in here, that's function 1116. So you can look and see, basically this was not really allocated at the salary level at all. So we had a $60,000 program budgeted and about a $2.2 million PE program in actuality in the district.
Where was that spread out?
Well, it was spread out between elementary and middle school regular education. So when we look at it at this level, then you can see exactly what your PE program is costing your district.
On this listing you have, we don't have a 1116.
Yeah, the 1116, it goes from 115
Oh, my
general
God,
music
I'm
to
sorry.
117 choral.
All right, I'm sorry
But
about that,
it's
guys.
it's in the details.
It is in the
so
detail.
That's why I couldn't see it on the bigger print, but yeah, it's in the smaller.
So this is what has taken Luann and Brian, it's been so painstakingly time-consuming for them to really understand the true cost and kind of ungrade areas of the budget, to be able to say with certainty that the PE department and the program costs X number of dollars to run in the district. She's done that for each of these.
And that's what we need to see.
Yeah.
Mhm. Sorry about this. I was actually working on this on the airplane, so the chorus program, which is separate from your general music. Right now, we just have stipends that are paid out of there and then the benefits. So the stipends paid for activities that occur outside of your regular school day. Our orchestra program, we do have some certified salaries for individuals directly assigned to orchestra, and then again, stipends for after-school activities they're paid for. The foreign language program is actually your Spanish and I believe French that's done at the middle school. So this is for English-speaking students to learn foreign languages here in the district. Middle school education, much like your elementary, this is your reading, writing, arithmetic, and science programs. Basically, to me, is your core
core
education
class, yeah.
program.
Can I ask a
Sure.
question, Luann? And I don't know what everybody else on the board thinks. I appreciate all the work you've done here. If we're going to go, I don't know if it seems valuable to go through each of these categories that's listed here, or if we,
Well,
rather than
that's-
have people have questions.
I mean, if anyone has a question, I mean, if you'd rather just ask me questions, if you have questions, if you don't have questions today, then you could certainly, send me email, send it through to all three of us when you send questions.
Yeah, I think we can kind of, thank you for saying that, Bob, because I was thinking that as well. And maybe, as we go through this, if there's any specific questions, like if I can skip ahead and go to industrial arts, there's a photography program. That's great. But there's not a whole lot of people are
1410, page
developing film these days anymore. And so will there be an academic review on the photography, or at least if we're going
It's
to
in the strategic
photography,
plan.
move towards digital?
It's in the strategic plan to
Yeah.
do a variety of programmatic reviews over the 5-year life of the plan. So,
Okay.
yep.
Good.
So I think that's in 2 years, Lori? Correct?
I could just, if I could just ask, and that might sound stupid, TRS and this.
Okay, so TRS is the teacher retirement system, so that's the portion of TRS that the board pays in.
The number, where are you?
It's
Yeah, I was just looking at the.
On any of them?
Wherever there's a abbreviation of something, I'd like to see some sort of table that will tell us what that
Sure.
abbreviation.
And that's a good idea, just spell it out and then we can put it in parentheses, so
It could
we
be,
Yeah.
it
refer
could be in
to
the
it at a
beginning or at
later
the end,
time.
it doesn't have to
Right.
be everywhere, but just so I know what TRS is. and
I had
what
the
this
same
is.
question, you could add this to that.
Right.
I didn't know what this THIS was.
I always tell everyone when I went to work in one school district, they had BLT, which was Building Leadership Team, and I always thought they were talking about a sandwich until I found out.
We did not put anything in for 1510 for clubs, so Lori, at some point, we'll just pick your brain for how you want that to be stated for
And then
1510.
if we're.
With
and then if
with
we're not-
associated costs.
Oh, yeah.
Well, no, the clubs are in here.
But not,
Right, there's,
we want to just spell that out,
Right.
what that entails in words,
right,
with, as Tony said, the associated cost, which
Okay.
is in that detail.
I have a question since we're,
well, let me tell you what THIS is. That's the portion of TRS, that's the Teachers Health Insurance Program, so that's the portion that the board pays.
Tom, are you on a specific number?
Well, if you just go, Lori, to like 1410, to really any of them that have certified salaries, you're going to see an associated TRS and THIS associated with both of those.
In the sheets, printout sheets.
Yes. So I guess one thing, we can just talk about the Municipal Retirement Fund, Fund 50, which is a pretty boring fund. Neither TRS nor THIS are paid through there. Those are both paid through the Education Fund, where IMRF, Social Security, and Medicare are all paid through Fund 50. So it has to do with where the money's levied.
when I was going through this, I was looking for a category, and someone correct me if I'm being ignorant here, but I see where teachers are, I see where administrators are. The people who handle recess, the people who handle lunch, I found 2191, which is vaguely says crossing guard. Do we pay for lunch supervisors?
Yes.
Do we pay for
Yeah.
recess supervisors?
I believe that's in 2900.
Up to 3 years ago, it was a family paid provision, and the board at that time, to control some of the cost to parents, decided that we would pay it. And it currently, at least at the time, Scott, was about $450,000.
Wait,
to take over.
5 years ago, parents would pay for recess
It
supervision?
was part of the fees, and they would pay an extra fee for the lunch, and what was, but the children had no option of going home
Okay.
regularly in mass, you can take your individual kids. So the board felt at the time, because of fees and their lack of visibility or whatever at the time, that, if you're going to make the kids stay there, you shouldn't also charge a fee.
So the
Because they
fee-
have, you're not giving them a choice, you're making them, you're sort of,
So the fee we were charging was for lunch supervision?
Yes.
Not recess supervision?
it was on top of the other
Lunch.
fees.
So that's in, we're actually going to be moving it back to 2191, but right now it's in 2900 for lunch and before school supervision, so it's 403,000.
2,900?
So Luann, perhaps we can add to 2900 to such as, because it just says within other functions, services that cannot be classified. So do you want to just qualify what a couple of those might be?
For which one, Lori?
2900?
So the difference between 2191 and 2900 is 2190 refers to other support services for pupils. So that's why we're going to move it back to there, and that's why you see crossing guards in there. 2900 is other support services more at the district level, and what that means is things that we cannot classify in another area as being a service that someone's providing to the district. So that's what it means. If I have absolutely nowhere else I can find to put it, it would go in there.
I think the idea is on this sheet, a few examples would go a long way.
Okay.
So, just so I can understand, 2191 is for support services for the pupils.
Correct.
Which now covers playground supervisors, crossing guards, lunch supervisors.
Correct.
But yet there's only one salary in there for a crossing guard. So how are we paying?
Well, that's what I'm talking about, that we're still working on this. So it's in function 2900 right now,
Okay.
but if you look in your budget, but it's going to 2191 so that it's in with the crossing guards because that directly affects the pupils. Okay, 29.
Okay, so it's in 2900 now and it's going to
2191.
Correct.
Okay, in the future.
In fact, when you adopt the budget, it'll be in there. Okay.
So Luann, you were mentioning IMRF. What's the thought on the fact that we know that there is a liability number out there for IMRF, a future liability number that I know we're going to reflect in our financial statements. But in terms of, I guess, how school districts act here, are there any thoughts in terms of, budgeting money, setting aside money for that potential future liability so that the school district doesn't wake up one day when that bill's due and then say, oh my God, we knew, this is kind of like what you were seeing in Illinois, we knew there was this huge pension liability, but we didn't budget anything for it, and now suddenly we wake up and there's this huge hole and we have to figure out what to do with it. So I'm just curious
Sure.
what's
So
going
how
on.
IMRF works, and I believe this district did not do a IMRF phase-in. I haven't double-checked, but I believe you did not do an IMRF phase-in. How they calculate the rate is based on that liability. So our rate, it adjusts every January. So I know districts that are paying 17%, districts that are paying 9%. Ours is right around 11, 12%. So IMRF is actually funded really well. So it adjusts every year.
It's not TRS.
What?
It's not
No,
like TRS.
are you sure about that? You mean, so you're telling me you think IMRF is almost a fully funded pension plan?
I think the way they work theirs is much better than TRS.
I think you might want to look at, I don't believe that that's the case, actually.
It adjusts every year, so it's not like they're going to come
I understand
to
they
us.
adjust our payment, but I think, because what I believe is the case is, the reversion will be back to the districts at some day if the pension fund doesn't have enough money, isn't, at a fully funded status. And so
I would
that's
check
what I'm
the audit, 'cause I
concerned
think
about.
it
Yeah,
talked about
IMRF
it.
is, to me, is a pretty
Most
solid.
Illinois pension funds are in a pretty poor state. I'm not aware of any
I
that
don't-
said a state that we would want to.
I don't think my opinion is IMRF is in pretty good shape.
I would agree based on audit findings, but we'll check and bring it back to the board.
I think some are better than others, but I don't think any of them are really rocking
We'll
that.
check.
Yeah. But that actually, Bob, raises a better question, and that is, at some point, we've been hearing now for several years, actually, that some of the pension liabilities is going to get kicked back to the districts. And is there any thought, is there any ability to start building up a nest egg for that potential eventuality?
What I did in District 23 is we assumed 0.5% per year. So in the financial projections, I showed in each year's budget that 0.5%, 1%, 1.5%, it kept increasing every year because if they shift the TRS to the employer, they would phase it in much like that. So I had put that in as a contingency that could occur, because then when you're looking at your final financial projections, you have an awareness that could potentially be occurring. So if you want, I can put that into our projections.
Board consensus? I think it's a great idea to start doing a little, at least number planning before we start putting dollars into that bucket. Thanks, Bob. It's a good point, being ahead of the curve on that. Now, I remember a couple of years ago, Scott, wasn't it a 0.5 point per year for something like 18 years? to get up to a certain percent, if you remember the numbers.
Is what the state was talking about.
What the state was talking about, yeah.
Yeah, I think that was one of many plans I've
Yeah,
heard
yeah,
through
yeah.
the years, but yeah, I think it was something along those lines.
I remember we had talked about it very quickly because everything was all over the place.
Right.
Before they torpedoed it.
So since you're going to be doing all this work on fixing this budget, are you simultaneously, are you also going to be working on itemizing the student fees?
That's on our to-do list of projects,
So that's,
doing a fee study.
right, so how I work on the fees, and I know that's a big issue in this school district.
Very big.
So, and that's why I ask you to look at the different programs and start thinking about what makes up a regular education.
But I think to do that, we need to see the amounts allocated.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, which is what you're seeing. So if you start adding up some of these, in my own opinion, extra programs, does that, right, that has to be paid for somehow, right?
The programs that are currently being paid for by this budget, is what you're
Correct.
saying? So you're asking for us to go through it and pull out what we feel
Well, I want
the
you to
fees
think-
are covering?
I want you to think about what does that fee cover, right? What did they mean by a free and equitable education? What is the definition? Is that reading, writing, science, and arithmetic? Is that reading, writing, science, arithmetic, art, and PE? So I think you
Tom,
need to think about it.
I think what Luann is saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, the more of these peripheral programs that we have, that has to be paid somehow.
Yep.
And currently, right now, we have a shared payment system. District pays some, student fees
Most.
pays some. And that's in part what's driving the expense of the student fees, is this large number of peripheral programming that we have, which is good. I mean, nobody's saying it's good, but if the district can't cover 100% of those costs, the student fees have to cover some of those costs. And that's why our student fee structure is top-heavy. So I think what Luann is saying is, maybe we need to start looking at some of these peripheral programming and what their costs are. I've been saying for 3 years, a value-added tax kind of system like they do in Europe, where you want whatever, then you pay for that to do, that kind of a thing.
So, I mean, I'll just release the elephant in the room. I personally can go through this and find a ton of offerings that we've been paying for that can fit into that $350, and actually I could probably come out with more where that number should have been $700 per student. So I don't feel that we're going to have an issue finding enough of free stuff that we've been giving, even if we even take away the stuff that this district has historically given anyway.
Sure.
Industrial arts, photography, you get rid of that stuff, leave it there because we've been paying for it historically.
Right.
And then you just start picking away at the Spanish, which is something fairly new, the French class, and then you say, okay, these are items that fall into that category that could go under student fees. I think as a board, we can do that, no problem. Are we saying that we haven't done that?
No,
It hasn't
we
been
have
done?
this. We have done this in the past. We've had we went through a year of student fees not too long ago where we explored this, okay? It's a bigger challenge than it appears on the surface when you dig in. One starts at the very high philosophical level of what is a free public education? Should you give everything to everyone? And then there's arguments of when you get to those electoral programs, you never know what's going to inspire a child. Is their ability to come to school every day and take band going to inspire them? And should we be subsidizing that more than what, if it costs us $1,000 to give that kid band, should we only charge his parents $200 or should we charge them $1,000? And there's a series of philosophical conversations I believe is best suited for a committee to discuss with not only the board but experts in curriculum and childhood development and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, when they did the referendum years ago, it was always imparted to me that they wanted the parents to have a little more skin in the game. So they came up with the idea of fees. And after an exhaustive, a year, there was no way to tie this fee went to those books. It just doesn't exist. All it does is build up the bank account a little bit. So we say, roughly it's this and that, and at the back of that fee structure you get, there's a rough chart that says it's kind of going to here. It was a compromise to get us in the direction of fees. But we stopped short of having the philosophical conversation as a district of, should it all be free? Should it be a la carte, or should it be somewhere in the middle? And I think that's where we need to do, as opposed to us individually saying, I kind of like photography, or I kind of like that. I think we ought to be very comprehensive in how we go about this, because as I first looked at it too, it occurred to me when I looked at it, like, and Tony and I have talked about this, well, gee, if you're going to sign up for band, you should pay for all of it. But then you start hearing from some people about what it does to the development of a child and inspires them, and how studies have shown how their grades improve. And then you start thinking, this might be some other type of program. So I think we probably do deserve a holistic look. And I'm hoping that while we get this done, it's not 2 years down the road. It's like in next spring or next fall. I guess what I'd like to hear from the administration is, when is it coming? Because I'd really like to know a date. And I know you're working on the strategic plan, but...
Yeah,
anyway, so that's kind of where we went a couple of years ago with this, and it was eye-opening.
I've been patient, if I may. I've talked to a few parents about the fees, and the easiest way I can explain it so they can understand is that a free and appropriate public education is like a Buick. It's a good car, it's reliable, it's basic, it'll get you from point A to point B. This district, I don't know how many decades ago, decided they were going to offer far beyond a Buick. Mercedes, BMW, pick your fancy car. There's a cost associated with that, beyond that free and appropriate. And that fee, a couple $100, is an offset. It's about $500,000 that we collect on an annual basis from our community to offset the cost of offering quite a bit more than we're required to as a school district. So if the board ever decided, we're going to cut fees, you could direct us to cut fees by 50%. That $250,000 is going to come from somewhere.
Yeah,
So, that's part of the conversation that we have to have, and it's on our list to do a study and to see if we can get any more clarity around what that money is going towards. But I don't know that we're ever going to have a one-to-one.
Well, I assume that a study would unveil that the money we are collecting is nowhere near enough to cover what we offer.
Not even close.
But since we do have some parents and some members in our community who are demanding it, then let's give it to them so that they can see that their value is there. And it's not only there, they may, realize that, hey, you know what, $350 is great for what we're paying for, or for what we're getting in return. So let's give them the list. Let's show them what all these extra things are, and let's show them that what the board is working diligently every time we look at a budget to still fit it in, so we don't go to them for $700 or for $650, that we're only going to them for $350, and they're getting all this extra added value. Because what I'm hearing is that they are getting this extra added value, and all we did as a board, or the board prior to us, is just look for a way to offset some of that large expense so that we can maintain the offerings this district is known for offering. Because there's a lot of districts I know of that don't offer certain art classes and certain industrial arts, and I don't know what people would do without their industrial arts. I mean, I'm being serious when I say that, by the way.
I've initiated this discussion, and I'd like to have a review to find what programs are still relevant, which should be increased, which should be decreased, and then we have to look at the funding for those. But it's my mind, at least in my mind, I think what's going to happen is, if your child is taking these courses, you know exactly what it is. There may be a little bucket at the very bottom that says, contribution to support extracurricular activities, that's going to be worth X amount of dollars, because that's going to be spread out across the board, and you can't identify specifically what that'll be.
And I'd like to say on record, I don't want to hear a parent at some point say, well, my kid doesn't care about band, so why should I pay for a portion of that? Because you wouldn't hear that same parent say, well, my kid doesn't care to be in the primary challenge, so I shouldn't have to pay for that. But if their kid gets into that, then they're all excited about it and they don't mind. So if we're offering it, the whole community as a whole pays for it so that all the children can benefit from it. And if their kid may not like the band aspect of it, they'll like the chess club aspect of it. They may like some other aspect of it. But if we can just detail it and say, hey, look at all these beautiful things that this is offering your child, and this is what the $350 covers.
I'm happy to do that. I've been having individual conversations with very few people, actually, that will come to me but I'm happy to talk with them and explain that. And I think one of the reasons too that you years ago went to a fee to parents is because we do offer well beyond that free and appropriate. And rather than having the whole community pay their taxes and contribute to all of that, it's the folks that are here accessing all these above and beyond services that we provide that are paying the $200 and some odd at the elementary or the $300 and some odd at the middle.
Which leads me into my last concern, and do these student fees cover some of the cost for supervision during lunch and supervision during recess, or is that something that's considered a offering that the education that is expected?
No,
Not for supervision.
that's coming out of the general fund.
Okay.
That's right off the top. That student fees are for extracurricular activities and such. When the board decided a couple of years ago to take over the cost of lunchtime monitoring is really what it amounted to. We were doing that right out of our general funding.
And when you're talking about lunchtime monitoring and recess, did we determine how much monitoring each student, like per student? Do you need one parent per 25 students, or 12 parents per,
Yes,
or one monitor, and each school gets their share of it, and it's all, there's enough monitors for enough students at recess, at lunch?
Yes, it was.
And that will be in the budget?
It should be in the budget.
Yes, it is in the budget.
We are trying to get consistency in terms of how many supervisors are outside with groups of students. It's written in a couple different places in a couple different ways. So we're currently working at the principal building level to determine what's a safe ratio that should be standardized.
Okay.
And Luann, I'd just like to say, this is excellent, and
Oh, thank
we've
you.
been asking about this.
Gold star.
And so we appreciate your and Brian's work. I'd also like to see the number of students that attend these activities.
Right.
Because if we have a class that costs a fortune and only 5 kids are taking it, that's something that does have to be looked at.
Right, and that's part of what we'll bring back, is looking at what the program costs and how many students are accessing those programs.
Thank you.
Any other questions on Fund 10?
Which one's Fund 10?
Education Fund? There will be a first. There
I
is
guess
a quiz.
just so I appreciate the information on the IMRF. The teacher retirement system, can you just give me just a quick education? Does the district pays? I think for some reason I thought that the teachers were paying the majority of that or all of that, and we were kind of making a pass-through payroll payment to TRS. So is there a component that we're actually responsible for as a district?
Correct. The teacher or certified staff member pays 9.4%, and the district pays on TRS 0.58%, and on THIS, I believe it's a little over 1%.
And is that a mandated percentage, or is that a
That's
negotiated
correct.
amount?
It's mandated.
That's
Okay,
mandated.
thank you.
For some reason, I thought THIS was 0.3.
There's two different components to THIS, and actually that went up in the last few years.
Is the, so I'm trying to see if I've got it straight here, is the legal services, it was like in the Board of Education, is that part of the Fund 10? or-
That's correct.
I guess I was just curious, so I know we have a tort budget?
Correct.
So why do we have the legal services in the Board of Education? I just want to understand sort of
Sure.
at a high level why we would segregate those two.
Well, tort is very specific, and that's a fund that's subject to a lot of PTAB objections. And so it really just covers your different types of insurance, your liability insurance. If you need to pay workman's comp insurance, that covers it. And if we have to pay any unemployment, we pull it out of that fund. But it is a fund with a very narrow focus.
Okay, understood, okay. Okay, and so it seems like on a whole then, the education fund from an expense perspective, this is what this is, we're talking about expenses, not revenues. So it looks like it's gonna be up about 4% compared to last year at a high level.
I have it right here.
Just want to make sure I
Sure.
understand it correctly.
What was the question?
Is
What-
the education fund's
it-
expenses,
The increase over the budget from last year was 1.44%.
the increase over the actual?
Over the budget.
How about against what we actually spent last year?
I can get that for you.
Okay.
Can you tell me the percentage again?
1.44%.
On page 3, Bob, I see a variance of 1.44% of 843,000.
I think I went.
He wants the actual.
All the way probably at the bottom somewhere where it's all, because we've got the fiscal year stuff here.
What
but
page was that, Bob?
Or you
I
did
don't
your
know.
own calculation.
Yeah, I think
and
it looked like it
you
was
feel
about
it's
4%. Our education budget's 4%
Over the
higher
over the
versus
actual.
the actual of last year.
That looks about right to me.
So I think I just want to make sure that, yeah, people sort of grab onto that. So when we're looking at our revenues, we're talking right here, our main expense budget's rising by 4%, and if property taxes are coming in at 0.8 or something like that increases, think about that sort of negative operating leverage, and the sort of the trend line that we're on with that.
Right.
No, that's actually a good point. I mean, if I'm looking at something here that shows this coming budget versus last year's 1.44%, and Bob, you were saying it was 4% from 15 to 16 to
Well,
last
from the
year?
fiscal year activity of 14-15 actual to the budget in its current state for 15-16.
Okay, so when I look at this thing, it's telling me 1.5% arguably, and you're coming up with 4%.
Well, two different measurements. One's versus the prior year budget, and one's versus the prior year actual.
But if we plug in this table, as he requested earlier, that we have the actual budget amount into the table, you'll be able to see what that actual number is when you.
Right, so he's looking at
Percentages.
what we actually spent versus budget.
But the actual shouldn't be far off the budget.
We were about 1.6 million last year over budget. I mean, the budget was about 1.6 million higher than your actuals.
Right, so that's 173rd. It's a small
So, yeah,
amount.
Tony,
Yeah.
so if you look at like page 51 of our packet, at the bottom, there's an education fund line, and it has, an anticipated budget of 59.5 million, and last year we spent 57.2.
Right.
So
So
two
that's what
things
I'm
we
referring to.
we also moved was from O&M, we moved the communication expense and the networking expense, which is about 200,000 that were moved into this fund. So there are
Explain some of it.
a couple differences like that, not significant, but
So when
a
you
few.
bring this back again, can you spell those out?
Sure.
So we know
Mhm.
if we really were up, down, or sideways, and what is it attributable to?
Right.
Okay, great. All
Okay, so,
And just at one point, I mean, it could very well be, Bob, that our adopted budget of 15-16 is 59, but our actual actually may be less than that.
But we have to, right, but
We won't know for-
we should set our
right.
budget for what we're expecting.
well, the thing we can't set is things like private tuition, students that need to go into placement in another school district. I mean, those numbers can swing by, hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. So, I mean, those are two areas that I typically see in a district that we either overspend or we underspend on those budget line items. Children move into the district that require private placement, that's $50,000 we didn't even plan on spending. So there are some things in there that
They're
are
unforeseen?
big swings in it. Our substitute budgets are rather large, but so we don't have as many people out this year sick or on FMLA. So there are things in there that are going to swing from year to year, and we always hope they swing lower than what we budgeted. So, I mean, some of those are not as predictable for us.
Understood.
And insurance, right? Somebody switches from family to single, I mean, it's a $20,000 change. So we look at things like that. Okay.
Okay.
All right, debt service, pretty boring. That is basically our principal and interest on the current outstanding debt, which Liz will be talking about tonight. Just a reminder that we did move the copier and VoIP leases. Those are actually need to be paid out of the debt fund. So the money is levied in the education fund, transferred by resolution, and then paid out of the debt fund. Why they came up with that law, I don't know.
Luann, just to kind of move through this a little quickly, the middle paragraph on that, it does not appear that separate funds were established in the
Oh, sure.
past
Okay.
for each bond issue. You know, I did a little research and I went back and I pulled up, and there was reports with debt service and that. I think you're getting at is each individual bond.
Correct.
And we just had one figure bond service. You were going to enumerate the subtotals in that one category.
Well, so what you would have is Fund 30, which is what rolls up into the budget and the AFR for the state. Then you would have, that issue you did in 13-14 may have been Fund 31.
Right.
So Fund 32. And in the same way, that matches funds generally in your capital projects.
Mm-hmm.
Because you always want to know that you have completely spent out a bond.
I think in all fairness, I think we were receiving that data. It wasn't clear, because I remember Becky would have number of years for the amounts allocated. That was for this is for this.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't neatly subdivided, but I think.
This is less work for me,
Yeah.
as you can see.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question though. When we did that bond the last time, or I shouldn't say the bond, but when we reissued debt to lower our payments and so forth, and took some money to do
The
capital
Emerson-
projects.
We redid the Emerson stuff.
Right, when we did that. One of the things we were told was that, well, what's good about this is you've got it planned for this project, and if there's some left over, you can use it for other capital projects. With going to a fund per issuance, would we be able to do that going forward?
Yeah.
You just transfer them between Fund 31 and 32 or whatever you're going to do?
Well, no, the issuance will stay, so in the debt service fund, Fund 30, that would stay, but in capital projects, Fund 60, you have your funds, you borrow 8 million, so you have the 8 million in your capital, on your debt service, you have your 8 million in your capital projects. So even if you didn't completely expend all your money and it was in Fund 61, you would still spend it out of Fund 61, because that is spending down all of that bond money. So even if you said, we're using it to fix field, but I need to put a new roof on this school for $800,000, it's still coming out of the same
And
fund.
there's no issue where a particular project crosses two funds because we're going to take 500,000 out of here and
Yes.
500 out of
Sure.
there?
It
That's
could.
okay?
Yeah, because if you do your bond issues in more than one piece, so under 10 million is bank qualified, you save
Right.
additional interest. So my project is 14 million, so I do a $10 million issue, and I do a $4 million issue. So it's now two different funds, and we just track it that way.
Okay, but there's no issue
No.
of spending, okay. I
No.
just want to make sure that's,
No.
And that's because the money can be allocated anywhere within that funding.
Correct,
Yeah.
within that fund.
You know, what this is going to do potentially is, if you all remember that we were getting reports for about 2 years where we had that $8 million that was throwing off all of our capital funds and the balances, and we would have $95,000 in the total funding, and it really wasn't 95
Right.
because you had to back out certain monies. That was quite confusing to me, actually. So potentially by having it stratified like this, we'll be able to see more of a raw number.
Right, that's correct. And then you actually are very transparent how you're spending your funds.
if I may just piggyback on this, just going over to Fund 60 where it's capital projects.
Mhm.
You're going to do that, is that only going to be, you're going to be breaking out funds for capital projects that are related to bond issuances? Are you proposing every capital project has it? And if so, is there a dollar threshold? Because that could be
No, so
unwieldy.
if you think about the different funds, the reason you would separate out funds is for bond issues.
Okay.
Okay? So you typically don't have that many, or if you use transferred money from your working cash, you would set up a separate fund for that. So it really ties back. You can see A and B, and we know where we are.
Okay.
Yeah, you wouldn't set it up for each yeah, that would become unwieldy for us.
I guess following up on Scott's questions on the capital projects, you'd mentioned in here that you and Ron had identified that the money that's left from our bond issue that has to be spent in the next year of $1 million worth of repairs, whether it's roofs or other things. I just want to make sure, I guess, because it sounded like that was something that we were looking to accomplish perhaps, in the next 9 months or something.
That's correct.
So, is that, we've had discussions about items, for $100,000 or less, so I guess just, what's the timing on, I'm assuming these project items will come before the board for approval, given that it's $1 million worth of items.
Some of the projects, like we're replacing 2 compressors and air handling units. One, we're getting some warranty work, so it's $5,000, another's like $15,000. So it's, things that we're going to that we really need to address before next spring. So we have a severe roof issue at Washington School. We're going to have to do something with it this winter before winter hits. I'm not sure where this is going to fall. We're still waiting. The tuck pointing on the chimney at the admin building is missing. So we have probably a year or less before the chimney could potentially fall down. So we're looking at, could we shorten the chimney? So because we have some mechanicals in there, is it cheaper for us to shorten it, or do we need to tuck point it? So that's something we're going to need to do before next summer. So it's really things, but the board obviously would always know about it. And if it's something that's over the $25,000 threshold, generally we have enough time that unless it's some huge emergency,
Right.
that
So,
we
yeah,
would
just
tell the
hope
board and you would approve it and
Right,
everything.
yeah, I would just hope, that, given that it seems like I would define it as a shorter time frame being discussed for this, that, if it's gonna be, and I'm just making up a number, 100,000 or more to repair the roof, if we know about it now, we should be talking about it at the board just to make sure that everybody is comfortable, because in prior times, we've had questions from people, well, how many bids did you get, and that sort of stuff. So I just want to make sure that, that doesn't get to a crisis point, and then there's hey, we have to bypass the board because this
Right.
now all of a sudden is urgent with
So
inclement
for
weather or something.
construction projects, I know we have $25,000 for approval, but we don't have to go out to bid till it gets to $50,000 for construction. Typically, what we would do is look at generally quotes if we're under 50 from at least 3 different vendors. So Ron is very good about that, always bringing to me at least 3 vendors' quotes. And then his recommendation based on experience with different vendors and that. So the only time we would have to do something, and Lori would alert the board, is if it was an emergency fix that we have to do, like the chimney crumbled off the building.
And we haven't had this discussion yet because I know it's coming in the next cow, which is the facility master plan. But I am presuming anything you're budgeting for in this one, which we're going to look at soon, that you guys say is that we got to get this done by next spring, is in the facility or is in the life safety program that says you got to get it done.
And
That you didn't pick anything that wasn't on there.
Or the master
Or the
facility
master
plan.
facility.
Okay.
So-
Because we're going to have to spend money on that either. I just
Right.
want to make sure that you're kind of synthesizing
We
the two
absolutely
so
are.
that we're not doing 4 other projects and then suddenly being
No.
handed the entire life safety project, like, yeah, but we did those.
No,
We're trying
and that's
to
why
be-
we've
Okay, I want to make sure
taken
they're
our
on it.
time.
So we're chipping away at that stone while we're doing
We're
this.
trying to be very purposeful, take our time, combing through it, working
Okay.
with our design team, architects, engineers, to prioritize the list and attach the timeline and dollars to the projects.
Yeah, we're kind of thinking about all of this. Unfortunately, we don't have that life safety in front of us, and that's going to put some substance to this discussion
Correct.
at some point. But getting back to what we do know is, I thought that we had somewhere upwards of $2 million left over from the field bonding, right?
It's about no, actually, you're going to have about 1.2 million, I think, when all's said and done
I
with
thought it was
field.
higher than that, but
But it may be because we haven't had the accounting of all the allowances and what was used
Oh,
in
okay.
that, so I'm just
All right.
being conservative.
let's say it's 1.2. You're going to use some of that money for some of the more emergent necessities, capital necessities.
Correct.
We can use that money for that. I get that. Some of these things may or may not be included in the life safety study.
Correct.
Okay, I get that too. My question is, since we're on this topic, I thought that there were other demands that were going to be placed on that bolus of money as well. For instance, did any of the funding for the VoIP, did that come out? It did, didn't it?
No, not the VoIP. The VoIP you actually leased.
Okay, well
The
then it was
IDF, MDF did come out of there, and we've already paid for it.
the network stuff.
Correct.
To the tune of,
Over 200,000, about 225.
and we still have 1.2 arguably.
Correct.
Okay, all right. And now, were there any other demand? I know that at one time, we had been talking about the doors and the locks and things like that. I understand the amount, when we looked at it all, was extravagant. So basically, your recommendation is to utilize that remaining bolus of money to tie up loose ends with these other projects.
Go ahead.
The doors that we put into they're in the master facility and they're actually in the 10-year health life. So we've built that in and been working with Carrie to,
I mean, we've reduced it by about $500,000 in doors when I've gone back and questioned them.
recheck the doors, what needs to be replaced. Are they fire rated or not fire rated? Took doors off hinges, checked the labels to ensure that they are or are not.
So we're down to 350 now.
No, it's probably more than that, but we did reduce it by $500,000.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, more than what we have. That's
Right. But as when we prioritize the projects, you're going to hear this next week, and I'll spill the beans. Our kind of mantra for the T-shirt is safe, warm, and dry for the buildings.
I spilled the beans to him last week, so, you know.
So that is what we're going with for the next 2 years of construction. I don't mean to poke your babies, but we have buildings that have some pretty serious issues. Leaking roofs, pretty bad leaking roofs. Parking lots, we've already had one workman's comp claim. So we're also going to be meeting with the village on the parking lots, looking at this fee they want to charge and the work we have to do, and if we put retention under those parking lots, which is figured into the costs that we've been looking at, should we really have to be paying that fee? So we're going to be having that discussion with them this week.
Be interesting.
What?
Will you have a discussion
With the village people.
That's what we call it.
Which I think is great, if we're gonna redo our parking lots and they want us to do retention,
Right, and we have other questions for them. And the secure vestibules, kind of number one on my priority of things that need to be done in this district.
It's part of why Elizabeth is here, so this is almost a perfect segue. I think you have one more little.
Could I just ask, just to make sure, could we have a board discussion on the secure vestibules?
Did you?
No, could we? We have not.
We
We've
have
talked
not.
about it, we've kicked it around, and there are varying opinions on it. And I think that in an open session, we need to have a long, frank discussion about the cost-benefit analysis of the secure vestibules.
We definitely can do that. I will tell you that you have put yourself at risk and liability by not having those secure vestibules, and you know you don't have them.
In the last 2 years, we have added so much. And I recoiled at the thought of how little we had
Yes.
just 2 years ago. So we're in a much better place, but yet there's still much more to go, as evidenced by that report that was done.
Rita,
Rita.
security.
Done by that report. But for a big ticket like this, Scott is absolutely right.
By all means, I'm not meaning to lessen the necessity of a secured vestibule, but is it a life safety issue?
Yes, it is. It is
It's
really a
on the-
life safety
It's
issue.
on one of
But
those.
we're required to do
It's
it.
on one of those
Yes.
required mandatory
We
life safety, or
we
is it a?
can make
is
it
a-
required.
No, I'm talking about by law. It's not like having a fire extinguisher somewhere.
No,
not.
it's not.
Explanation.
The thing of it is if you, okay, my daughter goes to Barrington High School. They had in the community of Barrington this week, a shooter that was, a prior student that was going to shoot up the school. So that's a pretty nice community out there also, just like Park Ridge. You have buildings where individuals are buzzed in. First of all, how well can you actually see them, or are you actually looking at them when you're buzzing them in? And now our first line of defense is a senior worker sitting there. So this
That wasn't my
but
question.
Here it comes.
what happens with your secure vestibules are, we get them in that area, now we can see them.
No, I understand what a secure
that.
vestibule
Talking about
does,
the
and
health,
I
life,
understand, and I
connection.
understand the importance of it, and I don't mean to diminish it by asking this question. This question is simply to identify, is it a requirement by some legal agency that governs us and governs the schools, or is it something that we're going to need to make a decision on whether we feel fits within our budget and is at the high level of importance for us to move forward on?
Correct.
Because the one thing I would hate is, I would hate for a roof to collapse on a whole group of students while we're budgeting money because we are worried about something else, which is equally as important. I, again, do not want to diminish the value of it because it is very important, especially in today's day and age. However, I just need to know whether it's something that's part
The
of.
safe, warm, and dry you'll hear is encompassing all that you're talking about.
Correct.
The safety of the students, the roofs, the dry piece. And in terms of health, life, safety, we can, when we submit, if you recall, and you two might not, Mark and Tom might not know, we're 1 year ahead of having to do the mandatory 10-year health, life, safety. And we bundled it because we wanted this comprehensive master facility plan done to know what condition our assets in and what they would potentially cost to get them into the 21st century and beyond, you know, future-proofing, if you will, the buildings. So our architects are going to help us decide when is the just right time to submit the 10-year health. We've asked if we wait until we have to submit it, which would be a year, is the report going to be less relevant? Is it going to be less accurate? Would there be any downside to delaying the submission until we really determine? We know we didn't have anything required, but we had a lot of things recommended. Could we have the architect put the vestibules in as a recommended under health, life, safety, and then it's a different
What happens when
process.
he does that is you have to do it then within the
Right,
five-year
and-
period.
But
So that's the-
where I'm going with this, I think Tom's going in the same direction, is this. There is a finite set of resources, and there are competing priorities, and we need to evaluate that. One thing, and I'm just going to throw out there, is I know they're important, like Tom is saying, but a roof collapsing, if it's more immediate, you know, you have a triage system here. But I do think what we ought to be also discussing when we're talking about this is, in terms of the secure vestibules, this is a very, very large ticket item.
Correct.
We have never talked about it as a community, and when we went to referendum in 2007, it was never on the radar, but keeping the buildings up to date and doing it was. This, to me, strikes me as something is, I think we need to go to the community for, and I think we need to bond for. But I'm just saying, as one board member, I think we need to talk about it holistically, about really the risk of it, and really the value and the cost, because right now we're getting bits and pieces, but we haven't done it as one thing, and we need to. I think we owe it to everyone out there to say to this community, I know we might think, gee, there was a shooter in Barrington, not belittling that in any way, but this community may say, wait a minute, $10 more million in my taxes for something in an area that is reasonably safe. Others may have other opinions, and I think we need to be very, very open in this dialogue and invite people in, and maybe even have a committee or something like that where we're inviting parents in the community, because this is a big deal, and I think I want to do it right, and I want to be very transparent. I want to have the entire discussion here where people are invited to come in and we have competing opinions before we decide.
So this is kind of a segue into what we've asked Elizabeth to prepare. And just one comment, the shooting that happened in Connecticut, I've heard the mother speak of one of those students. And I can't tell you of a wealthier community where you would not expect that to happen.
I'm not.
We're not, I don't.
Not at all what I'm suggesting.
No.
What I'm saying is, I don't have unlimited resources. We can only bond for so much if we're going to go that route. I think we need to look holistically at everything before we make a decision of
Correct.
that
I
magnitude.
agree.
And instead of disregarding the security of it, maybe you can provide us with alternatives for a short period of time while we're trying to budget for this. So what would it cost to put a security guard, a real one, not a senior citizen, at every entrance so that they're doing the buzzing in, they're letting the people and making sure they get to an office? 'Cause I do know the physical attributes of some of these schools make it very difficult. But maybe this budget can afford a security guard for the schools for a year or two until we can get the roofs done, until we can get the exiting taken care of, so that if there is a fire, we don't, sizzle everybody.
Well, and that's what we're bringing back to you.
I think, so the whole thing is, we're waiting to get the priority listing. And then all of this will be in the priority listing. And I think that, if a roof is imminently going to fall
We're gonna do it now.
catastrophically, that's going to be on the list to be done now. So it's going to be very interesting. And I said before, we're kind of dealing behind the 8 ball because we don't have that data yet, and it's going to be coming out next week. So, excuse me. So perhaps some of these answers will be taken care of when we see that priority listing. Now, as far as Scott's point, yeah, Scott, we've been talking about this for about 3 years,
Right.
drips and drabs. I think when we get to this point, look, everything for the 5 years I've been on the board, everything that we've talked about in substance, whether it's Chromebooks, whether it's, well, you name it. I mean, everything of substance that has come before this board has always been an open meeting. And I think something that is so dramatic and so important to the safety of what is most important to us, that certainly will be an open meeting discussion when we get to that point. So right now, I want to see this priority listing. We're not already allocating funding. We're just getting data right now. And then I just want to confirm, so will we be receiving that listing from the architects from Kerry next week?
We're meeting and having a meeting
Friday.
on Friday to get the timelining, the prioritization, and the dollars. He's been working with Nick at Nicholas and Associates to cost it out. So we're having our meeting Friday morning.
5th, right? Isn't that the Collins?
That's,
Right.
yes, that's correct.
And that's when we'll see all of this.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay.
And just to clarify, we will, before we submit our master facilities life safety plan to the state or to the state,
Health Life goes to state.
we will approve it before we send it to
You
them.
have to.
Okay, so we'll make sure that if vestibules is on there, it's because we chose to put it on there. Because once we put it on there,
done.
we're committed
Gotta
to
be
it.
done.
We
That's
can't
correct.
then say, well, it's not really a requirement, we put voluntarily. Once we decide to do it, we're committed to doing it
Correct.
and
Correct.
following through.
You got it.
Correct.
All right, so that brings us up. I think we can move forward to something else.
Okay, so just quickly, I put together where you are right now as far as your fund balance percentages and your days cash on hand as we get ready to adopt the budget. One thing I do want to do next week before we adopt the budget is take a run through of the revenues with you guys before you do the final adoption. That hasn't had as many changes. It's just, as we had discussed, adding the TIF payment in and grants and that, some minor changes to that. We'll also be looking at, I'm working, right now I'm putting tax levy projections together to go into the 5-year financial projections. So we'll have those ready for you guys to look at next week before you adopt your budget.
And Luann, it seems to me I recall a fund balance of about $60 million not too terribly long ago, and I see a projected fund balance of June 30th, 2016 of 51.1.
I think you were looking at potentially all funds when you had your construction money in there too.
Okay.
That's what I think. So my big thing is capital projects, debt service are not in your operating funds, so we have to kind of just move those aside.
So that being the case, if you go back to, I sent an email just so everybody knows, because I wanted a little historical data on this, on how that fund balance number has been holding steady.
Correct.
Because we have been running positive fund balances at the end of the year. So
Correct.
we're not deficit spending yet.
No.
So I just want to see how that's been doing for the past couple of years. And also the percentage of the expenditures, just to go back. And anyway, it would be interesting to see,
It'll be in your financial projections
Okay.
for you.
just to see how we're holding steady.
Right, and so in my financial projections, you'll see all of that information. Okay, so we asked Elizabeth Hennessy to come tonight. Can we move on?
Yep.
I guess I'm not the board president. I mean.
No, please.
Okay. Elizabeth Hennessy from William Blair to come and look at financing options for addressing our capital needs. You might think this is a little bit of a cart before the horse, but what we wanted the board to understand is kind of your different options and then for us to get a sense from the board kind of what you're thinking or what you're leaning towards in terms of financing the work going forward. So what Elizabeth is going to show you tonight is financing of about 20 million, how we would pay for about $20 million worth of projects over the next 2 years. So this is really for you to get an understanding of your options. And then when we look at the projects, you'll have in the back of your head kind of those options that we also talked about.
Thanks for having me tonight, and I will relay this and jump right into it. Tonight is to try to look at your bonding authority and your limits, what your bonds are that are outstanding, and what you can issue without referendum, and then some thoughts, even though I'm not suggesting our work, but if you were to think about that, how it might all come together. So again, very theoretical. I know you don't have your project yet.
Would you rather sit at a table and talk?
Why don't you?
You're fine, sure?
Oh, those are comfy chairs.
Yeah, do you want to sit there?
You guys have comfy chairs.
All right, scooch over. I think you might want
Yeah.
to. It might be a while.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you. Do I just kind of put that down there?
You're probably going to have to.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, sorry. All right, so let's, without any further ado, let's jump into this. Page 1 is your outstanding debt service, and you have 3 bond issues. The 2014 bonds are split into 2 pieces. The 2014A funded about $8 million of capital projects. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Super, thanks. At Field School, and the 2014 B bonds was a refunding to keep the payments exactly even to the taxpayers. The 2008 and 2001 bonds are both refundings of the 1998 bonds, which were issued per referendum for Emerson School. So what we have here is the outstanding coupons, the interest and principal payment remaining, and one of the points here is your bonds are paid off fairly quickly in 2022, and you really have relatively little debt given that you've paid off most of that referendum bond. Your statutory debt limit is 81 million, just over 81 million, and the formula is set forth by statute. 6.9% of the most recently known equalized assessed valuation, less your outstanding principal, which is about $16,495,000.
So Elizabeth, are you saying that by 2022, we'll have a debt limit of 97 million?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm. Another limit that is within that overall debt limit is your working cash fund bond limit. This has to do specifically with working cash fund bonds, which can be issued without referendum. And this formula is also set forth in the statute. And it's the EAV times your maximum education fund tax rate, which is $3.50, gives you a subtotal of 49 million. Then you add the corporate and personal property replacement taxes for a subtotal of 50.6 million. Multiply that times 85%, and that gives you your gross working cash limit of 43 million, less the 7.9 million that we issued in 2014 for the renovations at Field School. Those were working cash bonds, giving you a net working cash fund bonding limit of 35 million. All right, so the first section looks at financing options without a referendum. And non-referendum limited bonds are part of the tax limitation law. In 1994, the tax cap impacted Cook County, and it made your aggregate extension, meaning your levies for all your funds, education, O&M, IMRF, transportation, tort, all those operating funds subject to increases no greater than 5% of the CPI. So you're used to seeing that now. For when it comes to levy time, you can only increase your levy under the tax cap by CPI plus a factor for new construction. At the same time, they put in place a non-referendum bonding limit that allowed you to issue bonds without referendum in the future as long as the payments for those bonds did not exceed what you levied for debt service in 1994. So 1994 was the base freeze year. So your district luckily had an outstanding levy at that point for some non-referendum bonds. And honestly, at this point, I don't even remember what they were, but I can look it up for you if you'd like. But they were probably life safety bonds, and the payment was about $1.7 million. Then in 2009, they amended the tax cap law to apply CPI to that 1994 levy amount. And the theory behind that, similar to the tax cap, is that they will allow you to continue to levy and issue bonds as long as those payments don't go up over what was being paid in 94. In 2009, they thought, gee, 94 is a long time ago. Maybe we better add a CPI to that, similar to the tax cap law. So currently, your debt service extension base is $1,967,909. So that is the amount of principal and interest that you can repay for all of your non-referendum bonds together under the tax cap. And currently, you only have one non-referendum bond, which is that working cash for Field School that was issued in 2014. Okay? Now, the three types of bonds that you can issue are working cash fund bonds, and these bonds have requirements including a petition period and a public hearing. So the petition period involves the district publishing a notice of intent to issue working cash bonds, and if within 30 days of that initial publication, 10% of the taxpayers registered voters, I should say, submit a petition, then that would be required to be voted on at referendum. It also requires a public hearing. So working cash fund bonds, when issued on a tax-exempt basis, can only be used to fund capital projects. So that's an important point. If someone says, gee, working cash goes into your working cash fund, couldn't you just use that to pay salaries? The answer to that question is no, because you've issued them on a tax-exempt basis, and it's an IRS regulation that those proceeds then be spent on capital projects. The second type of bonds is life safety bonds, and I understand you're coming up to your 10-year required life safety survey. So projects which have been approved by the Illinois State Board of Education and the Regional Office of Education as being life safety may be funded with life safety bonds. Again, another type of non-referendum bond. The third type of bond is called funding bonds, and I won't spend a lot of time on those, but districts issue those when they don't have enough working cash bonding authority. And it's a combination of a debt certificate, which is paid from the operating funds, and then you fund that out with this funding bond, which also requires a petition period and a public hearing. Once life safety bonds have their state approval, they just require a public hearing prior to issuance. So limited bonds are great because they do not negatively impact your operating funds. So it is a separate levy. They're paid from that bond and interest levy. And the best practice with these limited bonds is to pay them off quickly so that you're, number one, able to keep your interest costs low, and number two, be able to access non-referendum bonding power for your capital plan. And as I understand it, you're in the middle of a master facility plan, so it's important to think about how those things fit together.
Hey, Elizabeth, on the working cash fund bonds, does a district like District 64 have an ability to issue taxable bonds?
You do.
What, you know, like, what's the spread differential between
Well,
those?
certainly they're higher interest rates. So the spread differential depends on what maturity you're at. But, you know, it probably ranges from 50 basis points to probably out on the long end, a good 1%.
Okay, and that's in Illinois, because I know we're not as attractive as other states.
Well, that's both on the taxable and the tax
Okay.
exempt, sorry.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, that's a
Just-
problem right now.
Just so that I can keep up with everybody, taxable bonds are referendum.
The bonds that we just talked about, either referendum or non-referendum, any of these types of bonds could be taxable. Now, the only reason you would issue taxable is if the IRS required you to do so. And your district has done it once when we refunded some of the referendum bonds from, in conjunction with a 2014 issue. We did that small portion on a taxable basis, and that was an IRS requirement because those bonds had already been refunded 2 times. Those are the referendum bonds on Emerson School for savings to the taxpayers. And the IRS says, you know, one time in advance they were refunded, one time on a current basis. Under the law, you're only allowed to refund them in advance of the call date once. So that's why that was done on a taxable basis.
And the bonds that we have, I think that we did for which we use for like the field school project. So my understanding was, as you're mentioning here, you know, try to amortize them quickly. And it seemed that there was also a sort of a spending guideline that we had to spend the money within a certain period of time. Is that?
That's correct.
Is that usually a requirement or?
That's a requirement
typical?
by the
Okay.
IRS, yes. And you have to spend your bond proceeds, expect to spend them in 3 years, okay? So if you don't, because of extenuating circumstances, bids come in different, project gets changed a little once you get into it, that's fine, but you need to have expected to spend it initially. And there are some penalties, but they have to do with capping your ability to earn interest on those proceeds and arbitrage. And there's really no opportunity to earn more money on the investment of proceeds than your cost of funds in this interest rate environment. So it's kind of a non-issue. But the rule is you have to expect to spend them in 3 years.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, turning to page 5, this looks at your outstanding debt. And let's just start from the left side of the page. We have the equalized assessed value. Very conservatively, we put 0% increase in the future. It's just so hard to know. Everybody thinks we've hit the bottom, and we saw a slight increase, congratulations, in 2014 EAV. Hopefully that will continue, but for this analysis, we're being very conservative, assuming no increase. The next column is that debt service extension base that we talked about. Again, based on the 94 levy, increased by CPI. We know that in 2015 levy year CPI is a mere 0.8%. Okay, so you'll get that, which brings us to that 1,967,909. Now, if we just move across the page from that 2015 levy number, we see that the current non-referendum debt service is only $302,600. That's a payment on that bond for field school, which means in the green box next door, we have capacity yet in the levy year 2015 of $1,665,000, which is a great thing. So you might ask, why didn't we use that up? Well, the reason was in 2014, it was very important to the board to be able to issue these bonds for field school without increasing the tax levies. So if you look at the next column, moving to the right, current referendum payment is $2,858,000. And then we've got a total of $3,160,000. Okay, so you can see that payment is just almost exactly what it was in the prior year, and very intentionally so. That debt was structured with a no tax increase. Going forward, for CPI on the debt service extension base, we've assumed simply 1%. really worried about what the CPI is going to be coming around the corner. I think it all depends on gas prices. Could be 1%. We've seen some projections lower, but I think it's going to be right around there. And then going forward, we've conservatively estimated a 1.5% increase. Now, last year, or in 2014, that was last year, when we did this bond issue, we assumed 1.5% CPIs, which we thought was conservative based on the average history is about 2.1%. But it came in lower. It came in at 0.8. So you'll see for the following years, 2016 through 2019, there's some negative numbers in that remaining debt service extension-based column. So what that means is the district needs to use some of its balance in the debt service fund to make those payments. Now, if we get a higher CPI out there, a 2%, that will offset some of these negatives. The good news is that in Cook County, we have a loss and collection factor of 5% on debt service only because the bonds are general obligation bonds. They must be paid. That's the nature of their very strong credit. So that 5% is going to more than absorb these small negatives for loss and collection. So sorry I'm going into all these nitty-gritty details on this page, but once we get through this page, we'll be able to move quicker. The other column is the referendum debt service. You notice that in 2016, that goes down to $810,000. So your debt service is going to drop from $3,160,000 in 2015 to 2.8 to 2 million to 2.1, and then of course it's paid off by 22. But the point being, when that referendum debt service is paid off, you will never get back up to that 3.1 million annual payment. You're going to be lower, and it's going to be constrained by that debt service extension base, unless you go to the voters with a referendum. Okay?
So Elizabeth, are you saying, so I'm trying to understand this, that debt service extension, and looking at your page 5 here, so do we not have a capacity to be able to pay more for debt for the next 4 years? Is that the way to interpret this?
That's true. Unless we refund some of those bonds we just issued in 2014 in conjunction with your new capital program. Okay, so, we did talk about this last year. I don't want you to think that we went into this blindly, but I think I would say, it's fair to say that last year you weren't aware and weren't moving on this master facility plan to the extent you are now. And so if we go to page 6, I think the picture really shows we've got the light blue bars, which are the unlimited tax referendum bond payments going down, and then the dark blue bars, which are your limited tax debt. And your debt base is right around that 2 million. So you're right. In order to issue bonds in 2015, 2016, and amortize them within the debt base, we're going to have to refund a part of your 2014 bond issue, small part, just enough so we can pay interest on the new bonds.
Okay, and by refund, you mean either we pay off the principal on them or we refinance them?
We restructure them.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can ask a question, the difference between unlimited and the limited, would that be because we took the Emerson bonds out pre-1995?
No, I should have clarified that. In the industry, we say unlimited bonds equals referendum bonds, limited bonds equals non-referendum bonds. So the Emerson bonds were approved by referendum.
Got it. I don't recall, I was living here at the time, but I don't recall the referendum for the Emerson bond, but it must have been.
Yeah, 97, I believe.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can compare 2022, right now we have the ability of 3.161 in the actual debt service. You're saying in 2022, that's going to go back to the 1,967,000.
Yeah, but it's going to increase by CPI, so it's going to be closer to 2 million.
So we'll have the ability to borrow 2 million, not, or to
Well,
have
pay off
debt-
2 million a year.
2 million per year, but not the ability of the 3.161.
Exactly.
But that's
And there's no way of maintaining that 3.161 with creating
Only going to referendum.
But that's principal and interest.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, so let's go to page 7. We talked about, and I know you're going to be reviewing projects that might total up to 20 million to fund projects, critical projects within your master facility plan over the next 3 years. So the following options review issuing less than 10 million in each year to maintain bank qualification, meaning that gets a lower interest rate because banks get an extra deduction of interest from the IRS to buy those bonds. So that's why we try to keep each issue under 10 million. So we're looking at issuing bonds of proceeds of 7.5 million that you would have to spend in the spring of and summer of 2016, 8 million 2017, and 4.5 million in 2018. Okay, so that's your 20 million issue done over 3 years. And this could be a combination of life safety or working cash bonds, but these are all non-referendum bonds subject to that tax cap limit of the debt service extension base. So as you so aptly pointed out, Bob, you have to refund some bonds to get the debt service to fit under that debt base. So we are refunding a small portion of the 2014 A bonds in order to do that. If we go to page 8, we've got this 20 million issued and paid off as quickly as possible under the debt service extension base. Under the Peach heading 2016 issuance, we've got the refunded 2014 A bonds of about 1.9 million, and then we've got that issued, the new money, 7.5 million, issued in conjunction with that refunding. We're using some capitalized interest, which is a bond financing tool from the proceeds of the bonds, very small part in that issue. Then we do the same thing in 2017, spring of 2017. Again, refunding some of the 2014 and issuing bonds in 2017 for proceeds of 8 million. Coming back in the spring of 2018, issuing 4.5 million, so that over those 3 years, you've generated 20 million in bond proceeds on a non-referendum basis under the debt service extension base, and we're going out to 2033, okay? So what I like to look at is your remaining debt service capacity, and you can see it's pretty much used up through 2032. So those green highlighted numbers is what's left. Now, when you look at all the debt together, those 3 issues plus your outstanding bonds, you notice your tax rate, is pretty stable around 14 cents, goes up a little by CPI, the 1.5%. But again, recall I have no increase on the EAV, so whatever increases we end up getting, I would estimate that tax rate will be pretty stable around 15 cents. So this does it for 20 million to take you through 3 years, but on page 9 in the graphic, you can see this really uses pretty much your whole debt service extension base up until, 2033. So that's a negative for you because whatever other projects come in your master facility plan in 2019, 2020, and so on and so forth, you're going to not have the capacity to really issue a lot of new bonds. I mean, the good news is every year that goes by and you pay off debt, there's a 20-year maximum maturity. So you get a new year on the end of the schedule. So you can extend out after 5, 10 years, you'll have about 5 or 10 years on the end, which you can put bonds in. But so the point being, you can do the 20 million and you can finance it with non-referendum bonds. But let's look at option 2. Option 2 on page 10 looks at issuing 10 million of bonds and funding the other half of the 20 million with fund balance, okay? So this is the half and half option. So we'd get 7.5 million of proceeds in the spring of 2016 and 2.5 million in the spring of 2017. Again, keeping the total bond issue under 10 million. Page 11 looks at this option. So we're again refunding a part, restructuring a part of 2014A in each case, but our bond repayment in this case only goes out to the year 2026. So that's 11 years. So that's better. You've got in that green box capacity after 11 years to issue more bonds on your capital plan. And again, the tax rate is the same, but obviously ends in 2026 as opposed to going all the way out to 2023. And the graph on page 12, I think, shows more room under that debt service extension baseline for future projects when you get there.
Where do we get the other 2 million from?
Fund balance. So that's a big consideration, okay?
The
So-
51 million we have in the bank.
Yes.
If I may ask, just for clarification, what are we forecasting in the long-term financial projections to spend on capital out of the fund balance? We had, what was it, it was like $1 million, we've debated this back and forth, and then it wasn't there, and so what is it in the current long-term that I just saw?
There's nothing in the budget, the budget right now.
No, not the budget, the long-term financial forecast. We budget what we're taking in, and then there's always some amount that is for capital projects. And at times it's been $500,000, it's been $1 million, $2 million.
3 million.
Right, and at one point we ran into some confusion with the issuance of the bonds, and we said put it back in, and the forecast changed. And I can't remember what we said in the long term. It was like $1 million or something like that, give or take. Do we know exactly what's in that long term, the 10-year financial forecast we always look at with the curve that comes down and the line for the 120 days?
At one time, there was money set aside for if a window broke, put it in. And Becky had always put in up to $1 million. She said we never used $1 million, but it was in the budget that there was $1 million that we needed it. She also had in there for capital improvements, $3 million figure. And now that came in handy when we were doing all of this build out at Washington and everything else, because we paid ourselves using that $3 million figure over a course of several years. And then we paid all of that out of our capital fund, and then we borrowed the money for field. So that's where that $3 million came from. At some point when we bonded for field, the conversation returned. And all that money was taken out of the budget to show, and then we calculated the effect on long-term projections if we only allocated $500,000 per year in the budget, or $1 million in the year in the budget. And she showed a very dramatic diagram that if we had the $3 million remaining in there, how we would use up our money by 2019.
Yeah, it was really fast.
Some ridiculous number like that. So she pulled that money out. The bottom line is, from what I understand, and Scott, I think you do too, Bob, anybody, the monies for capital facilities are currently not included in our budget, nor in the long-range projections.
I guess that's Scott's question, because I think we did talk about that. My recollection was, I think that the former business officer did pull that out, but then I think we had a little discussion and said, no, you need to put $1 million, $1.5 million in, because we think that's what we're going to spend. But I guess it's just the open question, Luann, is maybe to look at that. I forget the acronym and the firm we use, but that model that we use.
Oh, PMA.
And to just maybe look and see what we've got plugged into that for the next 5-10 years for capital improvements.
Because that's part of the equation.
That would factor into this, how much, that's the amount that's coming out of the fund balance. And if
Exactly.
we had budgeted $1.5 million, that would change the way we want to do debt and so forth. But that's the number I'm trying to get at, is I remember she took it out, we said, no. And there were also some really doomsday assumptions in the long-term financial, and then they didn't kind of pan out, and we looked at it, and it looked a little better than it was at one day. I'm just curious what that number we plugged into that, because that's the one that I'm always saying, I really want that for every decision over $50,000. I want to see what it does to that graph.
I don't know if it was $1 million or if it was still pulled out. I don't know if
I thought we told her to put it back in, right, Bob? Didn't we say put something in?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't recollect what the final result
I
was.
can look
Okay,
at
if
the
you could
PMA.
let us know, that would be helpful. Didn't mean to interrupt, it was just you're
No, I
talking
think
about that
that-
fund balance, and I wanted to know what we were thinking for the next 10 years. in
Yeah,
our
because
projections.
that's $10 million right there.
Well, exactly. exactly.
So between option one and option two, it's either taking the 20 million in bonds or taking 10 and 10, taking 10 out of our fund balance.
Or if we have this money built in the budget, it's even less.
So if we take, is there a benefit to take it in bonds, lock away 10 million of our fund balance so that we protect our future board members and protect our future, and have that money there in case it's necessary? If not, we pay off. Would it be better to actually take the bonds, is what I'm saying, and still secure ourselves with that 10 million that we have either from what you mentioned or from fund balance, lock it away so it doesn't get used up for something else, so that 20 years from now, when they're in 27, the board is sitting here going, damn, that Tom Sotos, man, if you fucking voted that way, now we have no, is there a way which
You know,
one,
it's really a
financially, which one would be better?
balancing, it's really a balancing act. I think, number one, Scott brings up a good point, that money in your budget is usually more for ongoing capital projects as opposed to like the master facility plan. So what we're talking about here with this 10 million is, what did you say the fund balance was, 62 million or?
51.
51, so it'd be taking it down to 41. And that's, what, 50% of your,
It's about 58%.
right now it's 58%?
Right now it's 72, so it would drop to about 58.
Okay, so,
Or we don't take it out,
Or-
but we make sure that we keep it just in case something
Yes,
does
yeah.
happen. Because the hope is we can bond the 20 million and make it to 2033 without needing more. If we can't, then we can pull that 10 million.
well, this is,
I mean, that would be
Yeah.
utopia.
that would be utopia, that would be great. I mean, we did the half-seas scenario and the full bonding. There's lots of iterations in between. So we can look at, what amount of fund balance, if any, would you be comfortable with? When you talk about locking up fund balance, it's good because we've got lots of scary stuff in front of us, right? Property tax freeze, possible pension shift. They've talked about in that Senate Bill 318 GSA redistribution of the general state aid. So those are good reasons to want to lock up your 10 million. From a pure financial standpoint, what you're earning on your 10 million in the bank is not going to be more than what the bonds are costing you over 20 years, even at tax-exempt interest rates, and they're low right now.
Okay, so that's the question I was asking. So
Okay.
it's better to use the funds
From a pure
than borrow
financial-
borrow the bonds from a pure financial.
Yes.
Okay.
So two other points I wanted to make is, I was concerned with tying up the money to 2033, so we're tying the hands of future boards. The second thing is, we have negotiations coming up.
Right. The optics of having a very large fund balance can change the dynamic of a negotiation, because they'll say, there's all that money in the bank account, why isn't it for me? And where when you're bonding, you're saying the money that's being spent is absolutely allocated to
For
this project. So there is that as well. But the one thing I wanted to make sure I understood, because I think you said this last time, and I want to put it in my really simpleton terms. I'm a taxpayer, and I have a $500,000 house out there or something like that, and I pay towards debt service in my tax, probably not the right number, I'm just going to say $100 or something like that. So when I get my tax bill, $100 of it goes to pay for this debt. As I understood this correctly when we did this before, if we just pay this off and never reissue debt, that taxpayer will save about $100 down the road, theoretically, in this real simple model. But we'll never be able to reissue that debt without going to a referendum, or debt again without going to a referendum, right? Because there's like a time limit on it, right? Where if you don't reissue it, right?
Well, with these limited bonds, let's go back to the graph
You can
that
still do
shows
2
you.
million a year, though, right?
You can do 2 million a year. So if you,
Okay.
all right, so up to this 3 million two, which you
Mhm.
have been paying, that's going to be gone unless you go to the voters for referendum. And
Right.
that's going to be gone forever.
Right.
The top of the blue bars, which is right about the 2 million, your debt service extension base, if you don't issue bonds, the tax rate will drop by $100 and I haven't done the math here
Right.
to refresh my brain.
Right.
But you can go back And
So we
issue,
could skip 5 years and
You
come
could
back
skip
10 years
5 years
later
and
and
come back.
reissue for up to the $100 again without going to referendum.
you could.
Okay,
It just
I was
creates
under the
roller
impression that
coaster.
once we let go of it, it was gone in perpetuity.
No.
Because I remember the simple logic we had used before was, yeah, we could save everybody $100, or we could save them $25 and get field done and reissue at a lower interest rate and use that money. And that was kind of the simple philosophy we had done. Is that right, Tony? It was, we'll save a little for the taxpayer, but we'll be able to issue and get projects
We
done.
wound up cutting the payment in half.
Right.
And extending it for 5 years to get field done. And by issuing that bond, we saved over $120 per household on tax payment, and we extended it by 5 years.
Yeah, well, and the savings is by virtue of this dropping
Yes,
down.
right.
Yeah,
Right, but what we didn't do is we didn't take all we could. We took what we needed for field and whatever, and we were able to save the taxpayer a little bit of money, but we didn't give them all we could by just saying, well, we'll figure out field another way or not do field or anything like that. Okay. I just want to, for some
Yeah.
reason, I was under the impression there was an expiration, like if you don't use it, it's gone. But
and
that's-
it's confusing because a part of the tax cap that applies to your aggregate extension base, that's exactly right. If you
Right.
don't levy it up to CPI, you never can go back there.
Right. Thank you for the
within some
clarification.
limits, yeah. Okay, so that's the 10 versus 20, and again, we can look at anything in between, but thinking about the affordability of that. This next section is referendum, and I know you probably don't want to talk about this, but I thought I would talk about it only because if you look at a big master facility plan, you have obviously more than 20 million of work to get done, right? And the 20 million, as we just saw, takes up 20 years of your non-referendum bonding power and really leaves your hands tied. So if you look at that 3.2 million and you look at a strategy of continuing to pay 3.2 million every year, the only way you can get to that, as I mentioned earlier, is to go to the voters. There's two ways to go to the voters, and I thought I'd just outline it here for your education and consideration. So, in terms of referendum, March 15th, next referendum, then the presidential November 8th, then we have April of 2017 school board election, and then we go a whole year to March of 2018. There's no fall elections in the odd years. Okay, and then we've got the deadlines for which the board would have to approve a resolution submitting a question. Okay, so first of all, if you were to do a referendum for capital projects that were along the lines of your master facility program, you could put the question on the ballot and describe exactly what you're going to do. You have leeway with language. You could say, I'm going to replace all the roofs, add vestibules, so on and so forth, and create that question and issue bonds in the amount of X. Okay, so whatever the amount you would issue would go in there. And for these examples, I've used 20 million. So the advantages of the referendum is that you have a clear description of the project, you get the referendums, the voters' clear approval, and you have up to 5 years to issue those bonds. So 20 million was for 3 years. Let's say you want to take this capital plan out 5 years, you could put the question on for 35 million, for example. And then you could issue them in the amounts that made sense to your construction plan. Again, keeping in mind, when you issue bonds, you need to spend those proceeds in 3 years. So if you go 3 years out from your 5, you're really talking about 8 years of capital, or something like that. The disadvantage is that bond proceeds in this type of capital question are a one-time source of revenue. So it's great, you get your 35 million, or like we did in Emerson School, you got your bonds and you've paid them almost all off now, but the project's there and you've just got your debt base, non-referendum capacity left.
What do you mean by it's a one-time source?
For the disadvantage.
It's going to be contrasted with another referendum option, which would increase your debt base. Now in that case, you could do the same thing, say 35 million over 8 years, if that was the number. I'm just making these up. And then pay off those bonds. But after those bonds are paid off, you would still have a debt base of 3.2 million instead of the current 2 million that you could go back to in the future. In a bond referendum specifically, you tell the voters in the question your project, you issue the bonds, you do your projects, you're done.
So we go back to the 2 million.
Yep,
So that's a disadvantage to us because we don't get the extra base,
yes.
but it's an advantage to the taxpayers because they don't have to pay the extra base.
They don't have to pay the extra base, and they may want, you would have to, if you had more capital projects after that, you might have to go back to them.
Can you discuss the advantage, could ask for a referendum with no tax increase given repayment of existing bonds? What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is let's go to page 16. Here's a 20 million referendum bond, as if you went to the voters. And if you recall, you drop down from 3.2 million payments to 2 million payments in levy year 16, okay? So if we were to do the same 20 million issue, but go to the voters for it in either March of 2016 or November, we could say, look, voters, your debt payments aren't going to drop down like they're currently scheduled to from 22 cents down to 15 cents. We're going to keep your payments at 22 cents and be able to issue our 20 million bonds and pay them off now over about 10 years, as opposed to if you didn't do that, non-referendum, it's a 20-year repayment because we can only pay off about 2 million a year. So the beauty of this option is that if the taxpayers are willing to continue to pay 3.2 million like they have over the last 20 years with the Emerson School, then this works great.
So their 3.2 million is scheduled to drop to the 2 million in 2022.
Currently.
We're asking them to.
No, sorry. The
2017.
16.
17,
Yeah, 16, 17 is when it's dropping down currently.
And then they would, okay, so then they would drop from the 22 cents to 15 cents.
Right.
So they're looking at a tax decrease.
Exactly.
Their
Right
actual
now-
out-of-pocket tax payment, they're looking at a decrease in a year.
Yes.
Yet we wouldn't, if we went with option one, they wouldn't see an increase of any sort in their taxes. They would still see that decrease from 23 to 15 if we went with option one.
Option one,
And option two would also
with
not.
non-referendum bonds
and
you're
also-
talking about.
Right,
Right.
and option two would also see a decrease from the 22 to 15.
correct.
And only option three doesn't give them an increase, but it doesn't give them the decrease that they're expecting.
Exactly. But they would have to vote on that in order to make that happen.
But
Elizabeth,
it would give us as a district the opportunity to get $20 million to do our capital expenditures or our facility stuff without having to.
Use up your debt service extension base, or
Without-
go out 20 years.
Or go out 20
Yeah,
years.
right.
So this would all be done by 2022?
No, this would be 26. So it's about a
2026?
10,
Well,
11-year repayment in this case, yeah.
So, okay, so
So-
it would be a 10-year plan.
Just a reminder, though, 20 million will not cover all projects. I mean, if you went to referendum, my recommendation would be that you went
Go
to
higher than 20.
referendum to do the projects that you want to get done.
Thank you for that reminder, because that makes a big difference.
Well,
If we're-
but it's a number. I mean, we're just tossing numbers around. We haven't looked at projects yet. But,
Right.
yeah, but to take that one step further, to maintain the DSEB, I said that right, DSEB, to maintain, could we not use a referendum bond to decrease could you do two bonds? Can you do the referendum bond and the limited bond, non-referendum bond, and then the referendum bond will decrease the amount that you'd have to do, so your DSCB would be elevated, or it would be paid off quicker, so that you're not encumbering 10 years down the road. The board will have more flexibility because your DSCB will be higher, right? Leveraging one off the other?
I was following you and then I lost you. But let me try to answer this and see if this makes sense. Let's say we went option two, let's say 20 million is what you want to borrow. And you want to do 10 million of it non-referendum from the DSEB like option 2.
Right.
Okay, because it's only 10 years, it gives you flexibility down the road. You could go to the voters for the other 10 million
Right.
and pay that off over 10 years too, and then their taxes stay at the 3.2 million a year. So you can mix and match this if you wanted to.
Right. That's what I'm getting at, because that way, the limited non-referendum bond still has some wiggle room in it if tornado
Right.
comes into Park Ridge. Or at least that bond gets paid off faster, so within, less than 10 years hopefully, but a maximum of 10 years, and that you're not dragging this out for 20 years down the road and maximizing or limiting your ability to be able to move your money around. Yeah.
Right, to have it.
What's the best option that gets us the most money, puts us in debt for the least amount of time, and doesn't increase the tax on our residents? So not doesn't decrease so I'm saying that maybe they'll be okay with not going from 22 to 15. I'm saying that maybe the taxpayers will be okay with not dropping from 22 to 50, 22 cents to 15. And let's say they're like, okay, we'll put a little skin in the game too. We'll stay at what we've been paying for the last however many years. What is the best option to keep them at the 22 cents, yet get us the most amount of money that we can get for the shortest period of time, so we don't handcuff future boards?
Right.
I think that would be a great, if you could just tell us what that is, and hey, problem solved, and we're all good, right? We all go home?
It's kind of option 2.
Yeah, and if you go to page 20, now this question is another referendum question. It still keeps the payments, what you've been paying at 3.2 million a year. But what I like about this question more than the referendum question, which asks for a very specific project one time, is that this allows you to issue bonds really forever, as long as the payments don't exceed the new base, which would be approved by referendum, in this case, 3.2 million. So the form of the question on the ballot says, shall the debt service extension base under the property tax extension limitation law for payment of principal and interest on limited bonds be increased from our $1,967,000 to 3.2 million for levy year 16 and all subsequent years? Okay, so it also has the CPI language in there, okay, which I think is good. But you don't have to have that CPI language in there.
Does this form question
Yeah.
cost the taxpayers more money, or are they still at
No.
22 cents?
It's still 22 cents.
And they will stay at 22 cents as long as many years that go by? What would change
Yeah,
that?
depending on what the EAV does, If the EAV goes up, that 22 cents is going to be lower. If the EAV goes down, that 22 cents is higher.
But that would happen regardless of what we
That would happen
borrowed.
regardless. This is set to keep the debt base at
So
3.2 million.
in the question, would you be able to say that by approving this, your 22 cents will not change? It will stay 22 cents?
You can't say that because the form of the question is set forth by statute. So this question, one of the negatives of this question is that it takes more communication with the public to understand exactly what's going on.
Well, yeah, 'cause it looks like you're doubling, only because of the way the numbers look.
Yeah, you're going to.
It looks like you're doubling. For the
Well-
guy that really wants to make it look like you're doubling, they're like, that's double.
That's quick math, yeah. So that's the disadvantage, that it's a kind of an awkward question on the base, and the statute sets forth this language, and we can only use this language. But the advantage is that DSEB, that 3.2 million never expires. So you don't have to use it. You get your 38 million of projects done over the next 10 years or whatever that number is. And hey, we're done, we're good, we're in good shape, our budget is, you can let that fall off, go back down to, whatever the case may be.
And we're not asking the taxpayers for anything out of their pocket. We're just asking them
to keep their payments
we're asking them
the
to
same
keep their
as they
payments
have
the same,
on the debt.
to give us the ability to borrow a ton of money to finish projects that this district desperately needs.
Well, to borrow money on into the future. I mean, I
Right.
think you still have to be judicious about how, you
Well,
know,
of
not
course.
using up the whole 20
Yes,
years
yes.
and all that kind of stuff.
Right, right.
But it does give you options in the future.
And this schedule would actually begin therefore in 2022 at the conclusion of what we already have listed?
This one starts in 2016 and 17. I'd say your years to do this and keep the tax rate the same without it dipping is levy year 16 and 17. Because if you don't, back to our original graph, we go from 22 cents down to 15, down to 14, right? And then we can stay there with our non-referendum bonds. So your window to keep the taxes the same as they have been is levy years 16 and 17. So that takes us through the April of 17 election. So 3 elections.
What is the difference in 7
But
cents
the
mean on a tax bill?
referendum money, you could do a referendum bond at any time.
You can.
So if you combine the referendum bond and the DSCB limited bond, I don't grasp the dipsy doodle because you're adding the referendum bond at any point, so no matter what it does. I'm missing that and the concept of raising it from 1.9 to 3.1 ad continuum, only because, that dip right there is what you're talking about?
This is the dip in 2016 and 2017.
Because you
And what
lose
we-
the Emerson bond.
We lose the Emerson bond, right?
Yeah.
So it's going to go down. Now, you can do, the DSEB bonds and keep it right around that 2 million,
Right.
but, and you're right, you can go back to referendum at any time. So let's say we go back down to 14 cents, you can say, hey, we have more projects than we thought, we want to go back up to the 3.2 million.
Sure.
What do you think about that? You were paying this before. So you can do that. It's
Is the-
just,
Is the mental
Doesn't sound-
impact,
Yeah,
is the mental impact,
It's easier to ask somebody to stay where they're at than to give them something and then take it away from them again a year later. I mean, but what is the actual dollars? The 15, 16 cents, the 22 to 15 drop to 14, so that's 7 cents. What is the actual dollars on an average tax bill in Park Ridge?
$1,000,000?
No, on an average person's tax bill. Is it $100? Is it $25 a year? Is it, $750 a year? Because I think it's a big difference.
Yeah, I remember when we did this before, I think our number was about $75.
it's less impressive than you think.
That's what we did last time when we went down a little bit. What was that?
What's the average home we want to use? What were we
Let's say
using?
500,000. Is that a
400
fair?
or 5? What?
400, I think, is what I saw years ago, but I don't know, maybe they've gone up a little.
I think the average home in Park Ridge is probably a little more than 500.
I don't know about that.
When you look
Can you-
at.
Last year when we got the survey back, it was 400, or a couple of years ago when we did 14, we
I've
used
seen
400.
357 or something.
Let's just say 5 to make it easy, because it's an easy number to move off of,
That
right?
might be high.
All right, so we're going, sorry.
But we're talking about tax assessed valuation, not what they're actually selling for.
All right, so we're going down 22
Yeah, I was gonna
to
say.
14, so we're going like 8, let's say 7 cents. Times, there's only 500,000. I think I did something wrong. Sorry. Yeah, that's right. $77.
Yeah.
That's what the drop is.
I remember this conversation,
Yeah.
that's what we were honing in on, is trying to get something back, but
Right,
it
so-
wasn't like when you cut it all out, it was this life-changing sum of money to not have debt out there, and with interest rates as low as there
Yep.
was this financial duty to you might want to keep them with so many projects out there for you,
Right.
so.
Right.
Because that was steady state, right? That was the argument we used a couple of years
So
ago.
basically $1,500 over 20 years per household.
So you mentioned that you would be able to, unless I misunderstood, permanently raise the ceiling from 1.9 to 3.1?
Yes.
But would that ceiling not revert back to 1.9 once the referendum bond expired?
No, because what the vote is to raise your debt service extension base. And why are you raising it? Because you've got a capital plan that you need to complete. So if you were to do a referendum like this, you need to tell the voters, we need this because we've got X, Y, and Z to do over the next 10 years with our master facility plan. I'll give you an example. Mundelein High School had referendum bonds expiring, and they took their debt service extension base up from $700,000 a year up to $3 million a year. And they needed to do that not only because of they needed future debt capacity for the master facility plan, which they're completing now, but the need was their pool could not be used. Okay, so the thing that sells the referendum, the no tax increase helps, but whatever you do, it's the need for the projects. And it sounds like your need for safety, dryness, and comfort is something people perhaps can relate to. But that's the project has to be described in conjunction with the money, even though that debt base will pay for projects for the rest of, till they change the law.
Right. What has been the track record in Illinois in the last 3 years on these kinds of referendums passing? I know that there was a dire outlook on getting these things passed for a bit. So what has
Well,
some...
on all referendums, it's hard. It
Yeah.
all goes to the critical nature of the project. Because, you know, if you can't relate to the need, you can't relate to the solution, whether it's a single bond issue or it's a debt service extension base increase. So, you know, there's Mundelein High School, there's Westmont, and I'll tell you, I'm just telling you my experiences. There's a lot of people with other clients with really positive experiences. That was a referendum that that failed no matter what we did. And that was for securing their entrances. And we tried DSEB referendum, straight referendum, all, you know, and sometimes voters just can't step up. And that's a unit district, it's a unique spot. But, you know, then you've got New Trier. They went from 174 million in 2010 to 88 million, and they put some of their skin in the game, right? They put some of their own fund balance into that referendum, which I think was a factor in helping itself. So, you know, if you decide ultimately to go to referendum, I think your idea of mixing and matching things is good. So if you've got the funds to put into the game, put some skin into the game, I think that shows the community that, you know, you're trying to save them. So now you can pay your bonds off if you did this DSEB in 7 years instead of 15 years. So there's so many ways to mix and match it, but the purpose tonight was to try to give you some options and show you that really your 3.2 is going to go down by that 7 cents at 77 cents, which is, or $77, which is fine. But you do have an opportunity in here, if it all comes together with your need, to keep taxes the same and set the district up with regard to funding source for capital projects in the future.
If we don't use the full 3.2 million, does that change the 22 cents, 15 cents?
Yes.
So there is a potential savings to the taxpayer. Just because they're giving us the opportunity to have the 3.2 doesn't mean that we still can't save them money if we can balance everything well and do things right.
Absolutely.
And they could still see, so we can guarantee them no increase unless there's outside factors, the equalization factor goes up and something else goes up.
Right.
But we can guarantee them no increase, and we could also offer them potential savings.
Lower payments.
Potential
And I like to
savings.
talk about dollars instead of tax rate, because just the thing, you know, the EAVs especially lately have been so crazy. Keeping the dollar payments the same, I think, makes more sense to taxpayers than the tax rate.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But
So-
their dollar payment would go up out of our control if the equalizing factor went up, and we have no control of that.
Right. So, you know, as,
So we want to be clear to them. We want to say that
That
it
this
won't
isn't
go
the
up
tax
from
rate.
our spending. It will go up because what the state decides to do. We won't make it go up. We can guarantee you that we will not make it go beyond the 22 cents. We will try to get it to go lower, but you're giving us the opportunity to do some things for our schools and our district that we desperately would need, and it would be the cheapest way of doing it, or potentially the cheapest way of doing it.
So one other thing I wanted to point out is if you went to the referendum to increase your D-sub to 3.2, there's nothing saying that you have to borrow 20 million. You still have to do it, basically you would do the referendum to get it up to the 3.2, and then you would still issue non-referendum bonds, and so that really can be for whatever amount the board would decide they wanted to do, as long as, my feeling is we wouldn't tie up the total amount of money for 20 years.
Once you get it to 3.1 or 3.2, you're golden, because then you have the flexibility of doing
Right,
whatever.
right.
But you enumerated 5 election dates here. You know, it'd be great if we can do it March 15, 2016. That's kind of a tight crunch. Do you have, or historically, has there been a preference for a presidential election versus a statewide election as to being more effective in having something like this pass?
you know, there's a lot of pollsters and people who have opinions on that. My opinion is you need enough time to do your homework and your education. If you short that process, then you can have a real issue. So if it takes a year, I think it usually takes at least a year. So maybe November you'd be ready. I know a referendum consultant who thinks November is great, and why is everyone afraid of it? It gets the most people out. And if you've done a good job of educating your community, you want the most people out. You know, the April is kind of the quieter election. But again, does it take a year to get the message together, or does it take 18 months? You know, and it's kind of in conjunction with your capital plan needs and prioritization. Thank you.
You know, you brought up a good point. You remember this when you said a lot of the success depends on what the project is specifically. And as I think about this, and just throwing it out there as food for thought for the group, a life safety plan does not have the cachet of, wow, you really need to spend money on this, right? And so there's a part of me that thinks this divide and conquer, where maybe you can do the non-referendum to do a lot of the life safety. And as I sort of alluded to, that's why I kind of let the cat out of the bag when I was reading through this over the weekend. And I'd seen one of these before, so I kind of had guessed what was going on. But maybe the idea of the vestibules and that added safety is what you go to the referendum for, because that's a dramatic thing that people can really understand. Tuck pointing and leaky roofs is more like a can't you just manage yourselves better sort of a question and response. But if you can say, look, we're going to keep your thing at 15 cents or whatever, but we want the 7 more cents, which is still no more than what you were paying, or maybe we only want 6 cents and you'll pay a penny less, because we're also going to take care of all these buildings for the next 20 years, and we're going to add this security thing. Because to me, it sort of gets back to, as we debated years ago, the idea of even representative government. Shouldn't we go back to the taxpayers every time you want to issue bonds? And well, I'm not sure that's true. We're elected for a reason. But if you're going to do something materially different, like this safety program, then you might want to go back to them and say, do you think it's worth that, or would you rather get that $75 or $77 back a year, or would you rather keep it at where it is, and that $77 goes towards secure vestibules? I think that's a way of really being clear with the taxpayer what's going on, because I think if you dilute it with all the other life safety stuff, we know how big and important it is, but there's no one big kaboom, I need this and it's going to change our lives this way. I'm just throwing it out there as a philosophical way of thinking about how to divide and conquer.
Yep.
Elizabeth, it's becoming more and more clear that if we're going to go down this route we could do a non-referendum bond, I get that, but if we go with the referendum bond, we have to get the word out. Now, we're currently undergoing a challenge to reach out to our community and really start a proper communication program. So, you know, this communication rollout by itself is going to take 6-9 months, because we're in the formative stages of that as is. You'd almost have to have that in place to use that as a springboard to go out and advertise and defend this ideology. So are there, you mentioned before, referendum consultants.
Yes,
Can you
yes.
speak just a moment on what that is, what that entails, and it cost ideas?
Well, you mentioned you're starting down a strategic planning process, and I actually think it's the perfect time to engage the community in not only your strategic plan educationally, and facilities is always kind of part of that. So I think you could tag on to your strategic planning process, and are you getting community involved in that?
It's in there. The strategic objectives 5 and 6 have to do with finances and facilities, so it's a big part of the strategic plan. And
But
yes.
it's happening with community input.
Yes,
Oh,
it was
absolutely.
written with community
Well, that's
input.
perfect, because that's where you engage the community about these needs for the project. And once you've identified those, that can turn into a separate committee that would then further engage the community on the priorities and the costs. And the ideal thing about strategic planning and community engagement is to have the need come from the community, okay, as opposed to top-down. Certainly the things you have to do life safety-wise, but if you actually could make this planning process, and Lori's probably like, stop talking already,
No,
but
no.
you could probably make it into a community engagement process specifically about facilities as well and future needs, because there may be other things on that plan that are of great interest to the community, yet not identified.
Elizabeth, on these bonds, and I'm just not familiar with these, so these typically, when I look at some of the payment schedules, so they're pretty consistent, so that, and it looks like some of our existing ones, that they pay principal off all the time, so it's not like they're just paying principal at maturity?
Correct.
Okay.
It's an annual principal, semi-annual interest, and, typically we like to amortize the bonds all through the schedule to bring down, the interest cost.
And are the primary buyers of these bonds, are they the banks?
Banks, for bank qualified, anything under 10 million, it's banks. Anything 10 million or over, you get into institutional investors, funds, although funds buy bank qualified bonds to retail individuals, that kind of thing.
Okay. And
Insurance companies.
And just in general, thinking about rates and things, do you think will we be lumped in as kind of an Illinois school district, end up paying a little bit higher rates than you'd see in the
I'm sorry to
market?
say, but that is the case right now. I
Okay.
mean, the fact that our state does not have a budget is a real weight on the municipal bond market.
And is there anything with these types of bonds that you could foresee where there would be any situation like it happened with, say, like the auction rate security market, where it would freeze up, so that if we had a 3-year plan and then all of a sudden something, could happen where it'd be like, oh, all of a sudden there's not really a market for us. Banks aren't going to want to buy these bonds or this.
No, not like the auction rate. I mean, those
Okay.
were things that had to be remarketed all the
Right.
time, right? So almost like a variable rate thing. The biggest risk, and you know it as well as I do, this district is very well rated. You're strong AA rating, AA plus.
Right.
Which is one notch under the AAA, as I recall. And the biggest risk that we all have is living in the state, bottom line. They have to get a budget, they have to fix the pension problem. I mean,
Yep.
you know it. We can't pick up Park Ridge-Niles and move you to Wisconsin. If we could, we would pay at least 50 basis points less on all your debt.
Could we do, how about California? Like, I don't want to go down.
California has done a beautiful job in rectifying their situation. They're in real good shape now. Progressive tax rate. It worked.
Was there any other option here? I know we flipped to one real quick that you didn't that you didn't tell us about, or did we cover all the options?
I'm sorry, I did kind of go quickly through, but for the referendum for bonds and the referendum for the debt service extension base going up to 3.2 million, I did the options for both 20 million and 10 million paid off, similar to options 1 and 2. Just to give you some ideas, bottom line is the more you can pay off, the quicker you have access to future debt and can do it without increasing the debt.
Elizabeth, thank you.
This is
I'm
really
sorry
helpful.
taking up so much of your time.
No,
Really useful.
this is really helpful and clarified quite a bit.
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Always a
a lot.
pleasure, Elizabeth, thanks.
So as you guys kind of think about this, we wanted to bring you all the different kind of options, is that we would want to be doing work next summer. So if we decided to go to referendum and wait till November, which obviously is your decision, it would give us plenty of time for planning, we would need some amount of money to do projects next summer,
When you say next summer, you mean 2016?
The one we're about to hit.
2016.
We're gonna have to decide that pretty quickly, because you're gonna have to let contracts in this winter, and you gotta get everything lined up so that you can get workers here, because other schools are gonna.
Ultimately,
Correct, so what Carrie will be asking for on the 5th is the board to give, not vote, but give some direction that we can go ahead and start doing design work on X projects for next summer, because once they start designing,
money comes.
The facility master plan we'll see on the 5th. Will we be able, is that something in its entirety you will get to us well in advance of that meeting? Because to drop it on us that night,
Right.
you're gonna get nothing for that. But if you can get it to me a week in advance,
Right.
then we can start thinking about
Yes.
this individually and having more of a
So our
thought
plan
process.
is, Friday, we've got our team back together, and we've really been working with Carrie to get the prioritization timeline, and then stretching it out over a 10-year timeline, kind of chunking it in a year, 2 to 3 year intervals. And then Nicholas and Associates is working to attach, dollar estimates to those projects. So we're gonna finalize our meeting, and he's gonna come with a draft drawing. We emailed him today to make sure that was on his to-do list. And then we will shine it up and get it out to you, hopefully by the Monday's meeting. So then you would have it more than a week in advance of the board meeting.
That's fine.
Yeah,
You need it.
by the
at least
28th.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you give us 4 or 5 days at least,
No way you
right?
can get it any sooner, because we don't meet with them until Friday, and then the next Monday is a couple days later.
So when we started this, I said, what is the benefits, potential benefits of just sitting on this for a year to make an extra yearly $3 million payment, which would increase the amount of borrowing? But if we pass a referendum that raises our SEB from 1.9 to 3.1, it's a moot point. It really
Correct.
doesn't make a difference. It really doesn't make a difference.
So, I mean, remember, there's 2 different options. One is to go for the money that you need, which is easier to sell. I've done that before. It's easier to sell. 2 is to do the DSEB. The DSEB obviously puts your district in a much better place going forward. Well, Elizabeth left. There may be a possibility you can actually put both questions on the ballot.
I think she told us
I
when we
think
met
you
with her,
can,
we can.
you could do one for, we want X amount for parking lots, roast, blah, blah, blah. Or the second question would be to increase the DSEP. I think we can put both on the ballot, which might be an option we want to
Which
think about.
might confuse the situation, and you gain the one you really don't want, and you lose the one you really need.
Obviously, getting your DSEP would put the district, in
Yeah.
good shape going forward with work.
But you mentioned getting money for potential work in 16, summer of 16. I mean, we still have capital funding money.
Well, we have about 1.2 million, but once we see his list, I would want to look to see if you would entertain using part of the fund balance.
Well, that's what I mean, capital
Yeah.
fund money, you have $51 million. So if we pull 10 out of that,
Mm-hmm.
and why I say that is because once we get bonded money, I mean, arguably you pay off the bonds, but you could still, once that level goes down toward the very end, I mean, you could start making some payments and you could just pay yourself back. I mean, if you're making the same payments, whether you make that payment to yourself or to the bondholder, you're still gonna make that payment. So you can incorporate that in your budget for another year or 2 or 3, and that 10 million comes right back up.
Well, but remember, we can only levy for the amount that we're allowed to, so to increase your working cash, right, is you have to levy
It's
that.
2 separate levies. Yeah.
Right, so you levy into your working cash, or the way you can look at it is that when you fix your buildings, your O&M costs should go down. Last year, you spent $200,000 in HVAC repair, that should go significantly down.
So the delta is what you'd be putting back into the.
Right.
But this is, I mean, we might be making this more complicated than it needs to be. You're gonna come to us with a budget, it's gotta be passed this month, I understand all that, but you can always come to us in November and say, by the way, we have these projects, we wanna do these, is it okay to do them? And they come out of the fund balance no matter what, and then we'll just take care of it. I guess the one question I do have though with this budget thing is, a year ago, and when we did the tax levy, we tried to have the hearing the meeting before, and then have the vote the next meeting. This was something we were trying to do because it just always seemed kind of silly that you have the hearing that moment and then we all vote later. It looks like it's a foregone conclusion. Are we really going to consider what a voter might have to say if they came to the
For
podium?
the tax levy, we can do that.
But we were going to do it for the budget this year, and I understand maybe we're changing so many variables and moving things around. But I think I think in the future, if we could maybe do that, because just spread it out, because you know what I mean. Because I do think that if I were a voter, I'd be sitting there thinking, well, why am I even going to come and voice an opinion? You kind of made up your mind. I'd like to say something and let you dwell on it as opposed to, for 2 weeks as opposed to.
But we have had a number of meetings, if
We
anybody
absolutely
cared to
have.
come and comment on the budget. They could have come at our last meeting, they could
And
come
Lori,
at
let
this meeting.
let me say that I've always said, and we say them in the meetings, we're really public about the budgets, and here they are, and we tell them all the time. I kind of just want to take away all defenses of you haven't been transparent, and that's the last one that's kind of out there. So if in the future we could schedule
Sure.
that way, I think it would be to our benefit.
Well, that matters.
We'll try, it's just with the timing of
It's hard, I understand.
everything.
And I just want to say something like philosophically, we have talked about not going back to the public for referendum.
Right.
So I'm a little confused here. I mean, it's great information, but here we, the old board kind of said, we're not going to go back. We're going to extend it past 2016 to 2021. So I just want us to think about
You're
that.
right.
because
And
we really,
talked about
let
I've
me
been
even double
preaching
down
to
on
people.
that.
Yeah,
We
the
would
history-
not only be going back to referendum for this, but then we'd be coming back in a few more years again for a
Just a
referendum.
regular
Yeah,
referendum.
see, there's
It's a different kind of
different
referendum.
kinds of referendums. The referendum that was passed in 2007, and Scott, just jump in here, but the referendum passed in 2007, not once was any capital facility need included in that referendum. And there was a term for that referendum. It wasn't working cash. It
No,
was
it's more of
something-
a rate, you had a temporary rate increase.
Right.
Yeah.
So
And
you can make payroll and keep the district running.
Right.
And what we're dealing with now is got nothing to do with our tax levy and operations and things like that. It's purely for our capital needs.
We call
So-
it brick and mortar, right?
But I think Vicki makes a good point
A
that
great point.
it's
Yeah.
been stated so much about
And we did
honoring
talk-
the referendum, not
we did
going back
talk
to
about that.
referendum. And I'm not arguing against it, I'm just saying,
When the
if I
board-
was sitting in the audience, I've heard this again and again and again.
I mean, I'm confused as a board
So-
member that
Then I
was
have a
different
question.
referendum.
I have a question
you know.
since I wasn't around. When the board decided that we're not going to go back to referendum and they said we're just going to keep this going, was the reason for not going back to referendum so taxes don't increase, or was the reason to not go back to referendum so that the taxpayers can benefit from the eventual decrease?
I think it was, and Scott.
And I think the intention of not going back to referendum is what's important, and not the actual words, we're not going to go back to referendum.
I think if you go back right before the referendum, the finances of the district were just horrendous. And what is known as a backdoor referendum was passed the year before just to get enough money just to pay the bills. And in '07, if that referendum didn't pass, we would have been the state would have probably taken over the district. So that 10-year time frame was almost, in my mind, was a pledge to the city, to the taxpayers, that we're going to get our house in order, and we're going to make this money last for 10 years. And at the end of 10 years, we'll use up that money. We may need more money, but hopefully we'll be able to fix it so that it'll extend beyond 10 years. And I think that was a time period for the district to get its financial house in order. And we're not going to come back and ask for, just give us this money and we'll stretch it out and we'll make do somehow, some way. That's what will happen. So if we go back in 16 and we're asking for capital facilities money, which was never included before, it's close enough to the 17 timeline where we can say, yeah, it's a year short of what was promised in 07, but in 07, they never factored in buildings. And our buildings have already had $20 million put in them, but they need another $40 million because the money has never been put in.
Yeah, I guess my question is more along the lines of, was the promise to not go back to referendum and try to keep never going back to referendum?
No.
Or don't go
No.
back?
No, that's unsustainable.
Right, or to not go back as long as we can. Was it for the purpose of them getting their,
It was to
They're
sell.
great.
It was to sell it to the public so that the public wouldn't feel like you're going to come back and ask for more money in 2
coming.
years or 3 years. So it was just, hey, we'll make this promise to you that we're doing this one time that'll last for 10 years, and there was projections. So I think it was as a resident at the time, my take on it was, Tom, was that it's a promise that we'll come to you this one time to ask to raise it. We're not going to come back again. And then that way, everybody in the community thought, okay, if you're really going to do that, I feel comfortable approving this
we're
referendum
not going
increase
to
because it
come
was a
back
large
again
increase.
we're not going to come back again for how long?
10 years. So it was a large increase.
So we don't go to this referendum until 2017, so we can keep the old board's promise.
Yeah, that's something to
We
consider,
somewhat
definitely.
owe that to the taxpayer, or we let the taxpayer, I believe the taxpayers in Park Ridge are so intelligent that they may agree that, hey, you know what, cutting it short by a year is just better for the district. Maybe we should. But that's a different story altogether. Especially if the intention of not going back to the referendum was not so that they can see their $46, because in reality, if you go to 300,000 medium household, it's $46, not 77. If the purpose wasn't so that they can eventually get their $46 back for another year or two before we ask them for a referendum, but so that they don't see an increase in their tax bills, then I think our taxpayers are probably, they're at the level where doing something good for our district is probably in their best interest, and it's probably something they would want to do in alignment with us.
Well, it's
So-
two different referendums, two different types, and so that would have to be clearly marketed.
Absolutely.
And because the one, right, the rate we charge, actually that referendum you guys passed is the most difficult to pass, which is, I can't see it, right? It's not bricks and mortars. It's a rate increase for you to simply operate your district. Those are the most difficult.
And we're not going back for that referendum.
We will.
We're
There's no way we cannot go back for it. We will ultimately go there, and the entire mission of prior boards, and this one as well, if we accept that as our thing, was to say, we think we can avoid that referendum until 21, 22, as opposed to 17. That's been our goal.
That was our
Because if you're only allowed to go up with your revenues at CPI 1.5%, 2%, and realistically your costs don't go up at that rate, they go up by more, and health insurance alone can do that, regardless of salaries or whatever. You just can't sustain that. So at some point in time, you got to reset. And so you go back to the taxpayers and you ask them to refill the piggy bank, and you say, we won't do it for another 10 years. And that's kind of what has to happen, or you start changing fundamentally what you're doing. Are you cutting services?
And the reality is the prior board in 2013, when we had our summer retreat, we came up with a way and made a mandate to the administration to extend from 2017 out to 2021. And we've been hovering 2021 for the last 3 years. And we're on target, we're on track, and I'm very, very proud of that. Now, there's not any reason for me to think that we can't even squeeze that a little bit more to 23, 24, maybe even 25. But at some point, you do have health insurance, you do have gas and electric, you do have some salaries.
So this referendum that we're discussing will not affect that promise,
No.
which is something I think we need to make very clear when we are going and asking for this, because I think that was what Vicky was a little, iffy about. we decided we weren't going back to,
Unless we use a major chunk of our capital funds, in which case, all bets are off.
You mean the general fund?
The general fund.
Yeah, so if you
Excuse
were
me.
to take 10 million of it, then obviously we're not gonna make 2021.
Yes, then we're going back to
Then you're not gonna make
referendum much
2021,
earlier.
what
But you're
you
still
can
gonna be within the promise
Right.
time.
Right.
What you
Right,
can
so-
do, which doesn't allow you the flexibility you'd like with the referendum, but you can issue the money, keeping taxes the same, maintaining the promise, and infuse that 10, $20 million under that I don't have to go to referendum
Right.
section. So you're
By
keeping the
doing that.
promise by doing it. So there's multiple ways you can skin this cat if you say,
Right.
you know what? Because there's a part of me, and I understand that we have a very smart tax base. Referendum is referendum, and I worry that in the communication of it, there's a lot of people who won't understand the difference between any referendum. They'll just hear that word, and their mind will focus around it. So I worry that, will they be able to distinguish, yeah, this one's for capital, this one's for something else? And they may be able to, and I just worry, I as a taxpayer might be kind of like, didn't we just use that word like years ago and they promised? And, I just worry that that's what would occur, and we're struggling with communication, so, but yeah, we will eventually have to go to that. So to do it now and then go in 2021 and say, and by the way, we need a referendum, I fear then that next board's gonna be left with, you just came to us 4 years ago. Do you know what I mean? So I think we gotta weigh all of these. I'm not saying I favor one over the other, but there's a lot of concerns like I've heard people was out there.
And if we go back to a statement somebody just made, that if we took 10 million out of our general fund and use it for capital projects this summer without doing any referendum or DSCB, whatever you do, we won't make 2021. But it really depends upon the spending. And we have a big thing coming up in a year. So depending upon how that gets negotiated, if our spending remains the same, we're not in deficit spending yet. Now, if we go up, I saw the projections, if we went up 2% per year, our expenses, just salary and benefits alone, exceed total revenue for the district by 2020. So right there, that statistic tells me that if we control expenses, even if we took 10 million out of the general fund, we're still not going to be in deficit spending.
No, and the thing of it is what you have to look at is your new money. So yes, benefits may go up by 5%, but what you really want to look at is what is our pile, word I can think of at this time of night, of new money that you're receiving, because that new money you're receiving, say it's $1 million, and as long as your expenses, your increase in expenses don't outstrip that $1 million, you don't need to go back to referendum. It's really keeping your expenses, that increase, to fit within what your amount of new money is every year. So your increase in insurance may only be $100,000 a year with that 5%. I'm just pulling that out of the air. So what is the amount of money then that you have to pay into your salaries and to keep the lights on and the buildings heated? So it's more of really looking at, when we look at the CPI or new construction, what is the amount of new money we have per year that we can use on increases in expenditures, so that those are not outstripping the new money that you're receiving.
Exactly.
I almost think it's an obligation of this board to give all future boards and this district the most borrowing power possible, with being fiscally responsible and not using it. So I think if we don't go to the taxpayer with at least the offer of a referendum, we would actually be doing the taxpayers and the district a disservice, because we wouldn't be maximizing our borrowing power. However, we would have to have the discipline, and we would hope that the taxpayers and the voters would vote in the next board that had the same discipline, and the board thereafter that had the same discipline, to not spend it frivolously to where it's just because we have it, we're borrowing it. But to not have the ability to borrow it in case you absolutely need it would actually be, in my opinion, we would be a fiduciary failure on our part for not at least offering and having that ability there.
It's like having a home equity loan. If you need it, you can always tap it. But that does, just because you've been approved for it doesn't mean you have to use it.
Yeah, don't go buy a car with it.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. I agree with that sentiment.
So I think when you look at the financial projections next week, hopefully it'll make a lot of things clear on where we're going forward. So, I've been meeting with Lori Lopez and that, so we kind of look at what types of curriculum adoptions we're looking at, so we can tie dollars to things like that. So hopefully that will make things a lot clearer for you guys.
All right, any other questions for Luann, or any other questions on this particular topic? And if not, Dr. Hines has pointed out that we have a meeting next Monday scheduled originally at 6:30. However, we have to finish discussion on the two issues that we spoke about in closed session today. We'll need to finish that up, preferably in closed session next week. And
I'm wondering if 30 minutes is enough time?
I think 30, we had a good start on all this today.
You think?
I think 30 is plenty.
I'll need to call in for that meeting, so if you could set that up so it can be a call in.
So if
Would you guys be willing
if
to
we
meet at 6
assume
though, and do
30
it
minutes
together?
is good, what time will we start then?
Meet at 6 and have a dinner meeting?
6:30 then next week.
I thought it was all ready for 6:30.
It is.
It was, I was proposing to the board if we wanted to, if we thought we might need more than 30 minutes, if we were going to push the time to make it a little bit earlier.
Okay.
But I think we're good. Based on tonight's
How do you
discussion.
feel about that?
I think we're
Sometimes we
good.
would do 6 o'clock meetings and we would just have some food there and then we could talk and eat. It's just, it's up to you guys.
I think we're already there.
Okay.
I think we're there.
Any other questions or comments?
I like to meet earlier because I like to get out. I
I'm not leaving until Sunday afternoon.
Do I hear a motion to,
Are we doing it at 6 or 6:30?
6:30?
Okay.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thanks for coming. See you next week.